Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 101. The Last Dance, Part 2. The sound of steel reverberated throughout the chamber as Northern's black stiletto met Call's claws in a shower of sparks. His lithe form twisted and contorted, the death glare in his other hand tracing argent arcs as he sought to rip to shred the castle lord's form. Definitely, your movements have gotten better, faster even. I'd be disappointed if you think this is what it will take to defeat me. Call growled with a provocative grin on his pallid face. The monster was no easy foe. He had perfect control of his mental state. Even though he seemed ultra-pissed a few minutes ago, he now fought with Northern with the calmness of water and spared no opening in his defenses. His visage twisted into a rictus of malice as he parried Northern's strikes with contemptuous ease. His claws a crimson blur of motion that danced perilously close to the warrior's flesh. Night Terror's massive bulk hurtled through the air like a meteor of living shadow. Its jaws unhinged, stretching impossibly wide as a torrent of void flames erupted forth, bathing Call in a pandemonium of searing black flames. Bah! Futile efforts! The castle lord snarled in defiance, releasing a shockwave that repelled the infernal onslaught. His form flickered, and he reappeared behind Night Terror in a blur. His claws raked across the beast's hide and drew forth a gout of black ichor. Northern saw his opportunity and seized it, his daggers almost disappearing into the air as he launched himself into a furious spinning assault. But Call was faster, his claws lashing out and scoring deep gashes across Northern's chest and arms. Pain lanced through Northern's body, the searing agony threatening to overwhelm him. He stumbled, his footing faltering as crimson blossomed across his brown leather breastplate. He frowned viciously, biting on the pain, and looked at Call. What? Feeling good? The monster grinned. He definitely was enjoying this. No, I'm not doing it yet. I am not emulating Night Terror at all. Of course, he wasn't expecting it to be a walk in the park. I have to be more conscious of my movement. It has to be deliberate. I have to keep my eyes on Night Terror. At the same time, he had to be on constant lookout for his opponent's attack. It was impossible, is what he would have said, but it was very much possible. He had a different eyes. I'm sure my visual prowess can keep up with observing Night Terror and the castle lord at the same time. Even though he said he was sure, it wasn't like he had tried it before. He just felt it should work. And because of that feeling of his, he was going to take the risk. How pitiful of me. I hate taking actions like this, but there's no better way to win this fight than to rely on this. If I can perfectly copy Night Terror's movement, then the castle lord would be fighting with 2 Hellion rank, not 1 Hellion rank and 1 walker. The notion was absurd, even to Northern, a mere walker replicating the prowess of a Hellion rank monster. But he knew his weaknesses, accepted the limitation of his soul rank, and was willing to surpass it through sheer force of will. A spark of resolve ignited in his blue eyes as he glared at the castle lord. Call grinned arrogantly, chuckling even. I will take my time and enjoy making this room your nightmares. Come at me, impertinent fools. Northern hated that he had chosen that timing of when Call spoke to move, but it'd be too petty to suddenly stop. He and Night Terror had already darted towards Call from opposite directions, cornering him from each side. Northern's daggers clashed against Call's claws in a whirlwind of sparks, the jarring impact sending tremors up his arms. He grunted, his muscles straining as he fought to maintain his footing against the castle lord's ferocious attack. On the other side, Night Terror unleashed a torrent of void flames, the searing black inferno bathing Call in an aura of nefarious essence. The terror's massive form became a blur, its claws rending deep gouges in the stone as it sought to overwhelm the maelstrom with sheer, unbridled ferocity. Northern did not miss a piece of it. His eyes were frighteningly locked on Night Terror, following every nuance of the monster's movement and diverging hastily to the castle lord, diving in and out for intermittent attacks. The castle lord at this point displayed amazing level of speed, easily blocking his and Night Terror's attacks while keeping his eyes shooting to and fro. But Northern could tell that the Maelstrom was beginning to find it difficult. For starters, the arrogant grin on his face was nowhere to be found. Northern's persistent act of diving out of his perimeter before his claws came was utterly bothering. In those moments, Night Terror took the castle lord very personal and would batter the Maelstrom with bone-shattering strikes. Of course, all of them were being easily blocked by Call, no matter how fast or how powerful. Their clashes reverberated through the air, sending shockwaves around everywhere. And through it all Northern's eyes was following every strike. It was had to keep up. For a mundane eyes all they would be seeing were blurs and sparks. But Northern could see every delicate arc carved by the claws. Every leg movement, undoubtedly primal in nature and shouldn't be found in a human. Fighting like that sure would be effective, but it was graceless. All it would take to shatter such amazing battle style is one brawl with any human. Even though Northern was slowly getting used to the company of monsters and their nature, he was sure not to forget that humans are different. Monsters are a definition of simplicity while humans of complexity. Surely it wouldn't take too much effort to break through a monster's pattern of assault. But with his flexibility and sense, if he could refine Night Terror's movement to what a human could use, fix its flaws and fill its gaps. Amazing! So amazing! Northern felt a flood of information fill his head all in a second. He was trapped in a realm of extreme focus that he couldn't even look away if he wanted to. A wide grin stained his face. Two ferocious monsters were locked in a dance of blurring claw, clothed by dark and red flames that flew around, threatening to consume anything that dared to intrude. And a white-haired with pale skin was grinning at the sight, his eyes out of focus, glowing with a radiant azure light. "I love this. I love this so much," the boy mused. Chapter 102. The Last Dance, Part 3. Northern felt like he now had a hang of it. No. This is not a feeling. There's so much in my head. So much. I feel so powerful with this much information. He had no idea what was happening or why, but more than ever before he knew what he wanted to do. His muscles screamed for him to dive into the pool of attacks. Even though his chest stung badly, they heaved with excitement. Northern had never thought he would fall in love with combat. In fact, while growing up he thought he'd use his smartness to avoid it at all cost and only engage monsters. But now, he was filled with so much excitement that he couldn't help but wonder what it would be like, consuming the battle styles of fellow humans. He licked his lips at the thought of it. With a roar of defiance, Night Terror recovered from another assault, its massive tail whipping through the air and slamming into Call with the force of a battering ram. The stalwart monster unleashed another torrent of void flames, the searing black inferno washing over the castle lord as Night Terror charged, its claws rending deep gouges in the cracked stone floor. Northern's eyes were wide with an azure luster. His senses worked in overdrive as he processed every minute detail of the Terror's movements. He saw the raw, unbridled power behind each swing, the feral grace that belied Night Terror's immense bulk. And in that moment his body could not take it again. Northern shot into the fray, quickly matching the frightening sequence with a torrent of fast double strikes that seemed to flow in and out of each other. His strikes growing more primal on the surface, more feral as he sought to emulate the monster's fighting style. Northern's mind thought nothing, he eyes, suspended in a realm of absolute focus. Not only did his strikes become troublesome for Call to deal with, Call's strikes were being parried easily with an out-of-focus look on Northern's face. Pearls of sweat formed on the Maelstrom's pallid face. Something made his heart tremble. If he did have any. Cold tendrils crawled over his skin. What is this? Am I getting scared? Of this insignificant mortal? As that reality seared into his mind, Call's expression paled for a second, then a dark scowl broke out of it. With a defiant shout, Call unleashed a torrent of crimson lances that flew across all directions. Northern's eyes darted here, there, here and there, calculating the trajectories of all the lances headed his way in barely a fraction of a second. He shot forward, colliding with them and swinging his hands, his blades deflecting the deadly projectiles in a blur as he danced through the onslaught. The castle lord already had enough time to regain his composure. He had delivered a frightening cyclonic kick that buried Knight Terror into the ground and in that selfsame second darted towards Northern. As the latter broke through the onslaught of lances, the castle lord appeared in front of him. Surprisingly, Northern's expression was indifferent, even though the castle lord had just executed an amazing surprise. This mongrel. It's impossible that he predicted my attack. That was the only explanation for Northern's cold composure. But Call would rather die than believe that a mortal could read and predict his attacks. Never! Call lunged with overwhelming fierceness. Northern twisted aside, the razor-sharp claws grazing his cheek as he countered with a flurry of dagger strikes that forced Call back several steps backward. Call sneered at Northern for a second and shrugged off Northern's assault as if it were a mere nuisance. I seem to have underlooked your capabilities as a mongrel. I prioritized dealing with the greedy king over you. That's not honorable. And I apologize for that. He raised his chin. But make no mistake. You are, in the end, only a mongrel. Northern didn't know whether to get angry or be grateful. Call's words sounded sincere at the same time insultive. Northern quickly discarded what it could he and focused on the monster in front of him. He was still in the zone and now more than ever was resonating with every part of his body and surrounding. He felt like a part of a much larger flow, not trying to chart his course amidst it but instead letting the tides determine his path. He felt like a battle master. Knight Terror recovered, fiercely sprawling to its feet. The stalwart monster let loose a bone-chilling roar that shook the very foundations of the castle. Its tail whipped through the air, slamming into Call and sending him crashing on one of the room pillars. Before falling, Call appeared behind Knight Terror. The stalwart monster spun into the air, delicately curling its whole body in the air to evade the castle lord's razor-sharp claws. Northern's gaze locked onto the terror again. It was not like he had absorbed enough. I intend to devour every style you are capable of. Northern was sure. Knight Terror would have been a very powerful warrior when he was a king. Northern dove in and feinted left, then spun with blinding speed. His blades trailed streaks of silver that narrowly missed Call's throat. The castle lord responded with a vicious counterattack, his claws raining down in a whirlwind of slashes that forced Northern to retreat, not without a couple of deep gashes on his shoulder and face. His breathing was slowly becoming ragged. His face was battered, blood stains mixed with sweat here and there. He could even taste his own blood in his mouth. He exchanged the daggers and clenched tightly, then focused on the castle lord who was locked in another fray of assault with Knight Terror. Taking a deep breath, Northern lunged forward. Now that he was already getting a hang of it, tangling up with them didn't seem like it'd be much of an issue. In fact, it provided him more ground to correctly mirror Knight Terror, although it also had certain risks because he was very close to a deviant maelstrom. The battle grew tense as Northern joined. Everything was happening so fast. The castle lord was locked in between the endless streams of attacks from both combatant, and didn't seem to flinch a bit. No expression of dread on its face. In fact, it was awfully calm as it deflected all of their attacks. But all routes for a counter were closed. Together, Northern and Knight Terror wove a deadly symphony, their movements synchronized in a lethal dance. Northern danced and weaved crude strikes around the maelstrom. His footwork was a blur as he closed the distance, striking from every angle in a relentless barrage that complemented the terror's bestial fury. Blow after blow rained down upon Call, each strike more vicious than the last. The chamber shook with the force of their clash, the very air trembling with the weight of their conflict. Knight Terror roared, its jaws gaping wide as it unleashed another torrent of void flames that engulfed the castle lord. Northern mirrored the terror's movements, his body coiling like a spring as he launched himself into a furious spinning assault, his stilettos tracing incandescent arcs that complemented the infernal onslaught. Seeing that their symphony was getting more and more fluid, A slight frown began to break out of the maelstrom's indifferent expression. With a powerful swing, he struck forward, impaling Night Terror with a shimmering red lance that belatedly appeared in its hands. The terror flew back like a rag doll, its massive figure smashing against the throne seat. Call didn't of course rest. The moment he struck the monster, he twirled, another red lance of energy appearing in his hands. He struck Northern, but the human had already seen it coming. Northern blocked the cross-strike, crossing his own daggers upon each other. He could feel the recoil sear through his bones and muscle as he withstood Call's powerful attack. However, that moment, Northern's vision became blurry. Crap! I overdid it! Chapter 103, The Rift's Soul Core. Northern failed to think about the aftermath. His visual prowess was undoubtedly a great one, but did it come without flaws? He figured it would certainly have one or two backlash, but he didn't just bother himself about it. Maybe he was too careless about the whole thing, or he was just too wrapped up in the moment that he lost himself. His vision blurred. Feeling his force on his lance reduce, Call didn't take any chance. He twirled the red lance and plunged it into Northern's stomach, raising him up with it. Northern coughed out a pallet of crimson. The visage of Call from his point of view was becoming 2-3, for the blurriness in his eyes didn't seem to be going away anytime soon. A small wistful smile curled up Northern's lips. He dispelled his weapon and grabbed on the lance, suddenly letting out a guttural cry as it burned his palm, but he refused to let go. He probably wasn't expecting it to hurt that much or at all. Futile efforts. Mongrel. Futile efforts. With the last bit of his essence, Northern's clone appeared again, ducking and driving in a lightning-fast strike into Call's lower ribs. The castle lord let out a monstrous cry and smashed a bone-shattering kick onto the clone with a neck-break speed. The clone spewed across the distance, crashing in and out a pillar and disappearing, back to where he came from. Then Call looked down at the dagger lodged into his side. The crude thing was subtly changing from black to red. He made attempt to remove it. Seeing that the maelstrom's focus had shifted, Northern lunged at him, his hands swinging a clean, graceful arc through the air. Call was sure there was no weapon in Northern's hand. Even if he did hide his weapon perfectly well, he wielded daggers. Northern's body was still suspended in air, impaled by the crimson lance. It was impossible for a dagger to reach him from that far, was what Call had probably thought. However, a silver sword materialized in Northern's hand, and he powerfully swept the blade across Call's neck. A thin line appeared on the maelstrom's neck, and slowly, blood began to seep out. Northern fell to the ground, grunting. He could barely breathe, and his belly was continually bleeding. However, Call seemed to be in a worse condition. Yes, I managed to get the last kill. Northern was happy with himself. His vision was still bad, but he could see the maelstrom staggering backward, holding his head to his neck. He refused to die even though the line of his life had been cut. Northern was sure this was the end of the castle lord. However, something began to change about the maelstrom. The darkness that had retreated into its body began to slowly creep out back. Northern didn't know what was happening. His legs were sore, all his muscles were sore, and his vision was getting worse. But he could tell that this was not going to be good. I need to move. Northern shakily tried to push himself up, but it was to no avail. The dagger. I just need to take the dagger. He was growing weak even in his thoughts. His vision was getting darker. The darkness swirled around the castle lord while Northern watched, unable to do anything about it even though he wanted to so badly. This battle had finally come to an end. He had ended it with both his hands. He had brought victory at last. But what is this weakness? All that was keeping him from moving was fatigue. He made so much plan to preserve his stamina, and it was all gone. Even his void essence was depleted. He could not summon his clone. Then Northern belatedly tried to look beyond the maelstrom, toward the throne seat where Night Terror had smashed into. Before he could carry his eyes, that far, vicious black talons plunged out of the maelstrom's belly, grasping within it a whitish round orb. Northern could only see it in blurs, but he didn't need to be told. That bastard stole my kill. Night Terror plunged out the core from the castle lord, causing him to stumble forward, closer to Northern and fall. What a miracle! This close was enough for Northern to crawl forward. Even though he was utterly tired, he hauled his body and moved closer to the maelstrom-paled corpse with a gaping hole within it. Then he dislodged his red dagger, and immediately stabbed it on himself. Weapon ability. Blood Drinker has been affected. Slowly, the pain that stung all over his face, body, and stomach began to reduce. But in that while, Night Terror clasped a whitish core in within its claws, red eyes burning with malice as they looked at it. Then the monster drove its gaze to Northern, who was currently struggling to pull himself up. Of course, it too probably understand that there was an inevitable battle between it and this human. Perhaps that was why it looked with a disturbing heartless glow in its eyes. Night Terror's hand moved and dropped the soul core into its mouth. Northern felt like he wanted to shout to stop it at the moment, but no voice came out. Using Death Glare's ability only healed him of any blood-resulted wounds. Not that it cured him of fatigue. His eyes was still blurry, his muscles were still sore. Although, he felt way better than he was a couple of seconds ago. Northern watched the monster gulp down the soul core of a maelstrom rank monster like it was a pill, wondering what might happen to it. Night Terror was bound to be stronger. Both of them were in battered states. But now that it had taken Call's soul core, the differences have suddenly widened. I'm doomed either ways. There was nothing to do at this point. Just when Northern thought this was the worst thing that could happen, he suddenly heard a voice. A voice he did not miss at all. The soul core of the rift is being reinforced. The soul core of the rift is evolving. Northern's face paled. The soul core of the rift is evolving? As if that was not enough, the system added. Rift Guardian, hazardous maelstrom malevolent call, has been killed. Soul core of the rift has been identified. Soul core of the rift, catastrophic Hellion Night Terror, is evolving to devilish Hellion Dark Terror. Upon complete evolution, rift tier will increase to V. Northern felt like the weight of the world just dropped on his head. Night Terror was the soul core of the rift all along. Oh hell no! Chapter 104, Night Terror's Evolution. Northern was struck with a whirlwind of confusion. He stared, dazed as the stalwart monster fought with itself. Something was happening to it, its body was changing, and the change seemed to come with a harrowing pain. Stupid, 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 stupid. These words resounded in Northern's head over and over again. He thought he had cracked it all, but he looked past one thing. Only one being was allowed to be a deviant, to be different from other monsters, stronger than other monsters. It was the guardian of a gate. However, there were two. Northern not only failed to consider the possibility of there being two guardians, but also failed to evaluate this fact and place more suspicion on Night Terror. If the Castle Lord was the Rift Guardian, what then is Night Terror? One could also not blame him, he knew nothing about Rift after all. Northern had come this far solely by relying on the information that his parents fed him. All by himself, he had pieced the puzzle of this gate together and reached this point. But it still annoyed him to think that the Rift's soul core was hanging around him all this while. But how? How? Northern had never heard of a situation where the soul core of a rift is an actual monster. Always, the location was revealed after the Guardian is dealt with, and it usually is a place being guarded by the last boss, called a Guardian. But this rift, the Castle Lord even sought to kill Night Terror. How is that guarding the rift's soul core? Northern felt like his head was going to burst from all the thoughts that were running through his head. Could all this problem stem from the Castle Lord's true identity? Northern frowned as he remembered something the Maelstrom had said. He looked at the corpse. He split himself into two. And only half is this strong? I hope I and your other half do not cross path, he muttered to the corpse of the Castle Lord. Then he looked at Night Terror, who was beginning to undergo some changes. Its body seemed to be swelling, like something was trying to break out of it. This made the monster let out a guttural growl. An elegant blade slowly materialized out of black sparks as Northern stretched his hand. Its one-edged blade had a distinctive bluish hue, reflecting light and creating a subtle yet mesmerizing pattern that resembled flowing water, hinting at the blade's sharpness and potential lethality. The tsuba, handguard, appeared to be wrapped in a dark wrapping material, a tattered black tape of some sort. The sword's silhouette against the dark room created an almost ethereal ambience that looked graceful yet deadly in the hands of the white-haired mortal. Northern's gaze, even though blurry, did not waver from Night Terror's disproportionate form. The monster seemed to be getting worse by the second. Northern almost felt pity for it. Then he voraciously shook his head and filled it with the horrors he had faced, all because he encountered this monstrous entity. All the hatred and vengeance he had nurtured began to resurface. He additionally thought about how stupid he was, failing to recognize that killing Night Terror from the beginning would have saved him from this hell a long time ago. Anger boiled inside of him. It made all his visceral hot. His chest heaved with vexation. Nothing. I have wanted nothing more than to kill you. I have waited for this moment. Had I known better, I should have stabbed you during war, times when I had the chance. But he even went as far as saving the Terror from the clutch of death. Northern couldn't begin to tell how much despise for himself welled inside of him. How could he be so dumb? However, all that was going to come to an end now. Allowing Night Terror to finish evolving was going to be a hassle. No, a hassle is an understatement. Night Terror is of a catastrophe danger level. Upon evolution it would evolve to a devil danger level. A devil danger level could wreak havoc at an unfathomable rate. Since it's even in Hellion rank, it could tear down strongholds, and even a sage would be unable to deal with it. And that was the monster he was going to face? He didn't need to be told. Even with Soul Taker he had no hope. That is why he could not allow Night Terror to finish evolving. He had to kill the monster while it was going through the changes of evolution. He needed to strike now. And with the Soul Taker it should work. After all, the blade ignored resistance. Northern's grip tightened around the hilt of the ethereal sword that had materialized in his grasp. His knuckles whitening as a newfound determination surged through his veins. His battered body still bore the scars of his harrowing clash against Call. But in that moment, all pain and fatigue faded into insignificance. For he was consumed by vengeance and rage. Outside the rift, several tents of rags decorated the deserted plain that hosted the imposing rift. People in different kinds of armor, sleek and huge, walked to and fro in chatters. A massive tent plunged out of the circle of other tents, closer to the rift than others. Inside it, a couple of individuals sat on the ground, cross-legged and facing each other. So what is the next thing we do? We are not going to wait around till it shatters, are we? The green-haired boy asked politely with a smile. Every other person in the tent had the same concern. They didn't need to voice it out. It was evident on their faces. Bram's question was met with a grave silence. Everyone was facing the same dilemma, obviously. In the decorum, Terence suddenly flinched. She looked outside, her eyes trembling. At that same time, Annette also looked outside, her face contorted with a deep frown. Both their expressions had Gilbert so worried that he had to ask, "What is wrong?" The rift. Its essence is suddenly rising. Annette sprawled to her and hastened out of the tent, having to lower her head. Every other person also had to bend as they ran out of the tent. All of them stopped in front of the skyscraping tear in space, staring with puzzled expressions. There were no visible changes in the rift appearance, but the two people who were marvelously adept at sensing soul essence stared at the rift with concerning expressions on their faces. Annette particularly looked pissed. She gritted her teeth and clenched her fist. If he is the one in there, how is he supposed to survive? Damn it! Terence's voice came out, breaking the tension in the air. She looked at Gilbert. The rift is evolving, again. All of them gasped. Well, Raven and a distinctive few were indifferent to the news. Even Bram was still smiling as usual. But there is also something else. Gilbert looked around Terence as she continued. She turned back to the rift. For some reason, its guardian is dead. The gateway is open, at least until the evolution process is complete. That's what I think. I couldn't sense that. She's incredible. Annette mused. Her expression came to life with a vibrant spark ignited in her fiery eye. "What are we waiting for? Enter into the damn thing," she shouted. Chapter 105. Light at the end of the tunnel. The monster's hide rippled and stretched, sickening cracks reverberating through the air as its bones began to reform, reshaping themselves to accommodate the monstrous growth. Thick, ropey tendrils of obsidian flesh burst forth from the creature's back, writhing and undulating like serpents as they extended outward, their tips splitting into wicked barbs that dripped with a viscous, tar-like ichor. Night Terror let out a guttural roar of agony, the sound reverberating through Northern's very soul as the monster's jaws unhinged, stretching impossibly wide to accommodate the growth of its fangs. Its claws elongated into wicked talons, each one easily as long as a grown man's arm, their razor-sharp edges glinting with a malevolent sheen. It was a sight ripped straight from the darkest of nightmares, a perverse mockery of nature's design that threatened to unhinge the very foundations of reality itself. It was already this much of a threat during its evolution. How much worse would it be should Night Terror become a devil? Unthinkable, it's unthinkable, Northern reasoned. Now all that was left was for him to dive into action, but he was so weak that his legs were trembling even as he stood. For a moment, he thought the fatigue was gone because of the rage that consumed him. But it turned out he was wrong. This was not some supernatural story where the power of anger fueled his body with strength. The reality was that he was tired. However, there was still something possible. Northern just had to rely on adrenaline for a little while. As Night Terror let out another roar of agony that echoed through the ruined throne room, he shouted at himself, "Move, goddammit!" Northern launched himself forward, the ghostly blade trailing streaks of azure light as he closed the distance between himself and Night Terror. The Terror's baleful gaze snapped towards him, its eyes burning with a hatred so intense, so primal, that it seemed to scorch the very air around them. Night Terror, even in his nightmarish state, unleashed a torrent of black flames towards Northern. His vision was blurry, but his senses were still as sharp as the edge of a blade. All Eyes was still powerfully working even though his vision was strained. Northern swung the ghostly blade forward, cutting through the flames like paper. He coiled his body like a spring and projected himself into fast assault, the Soul Taker weaving sharp cuts through the inferno. The searing heat of the flames distorted his sense of perception here and there, but Northern was steeled with a frightening determination to survive. This was not going to be his own last battle. He fought on, each strike more desperate than the last as he battered against Night Terror's evolving form. The beast's tendrils lashed out, barbed tips leaving shallow, ragged lacerations on Northern's body as he narrowly evaded their lethal embrace. He grunted in pain, his legs buckling momentarily before he regained his footing, his blade trailing streaks of ghostly light as he pressed the attack. As he pushed forth an opening, looking to stab through the center of the monster's uneven form, Night Terror's enlarged tail lashed through and slammed into Northern like a tidal wave. The battered warrior was sent hurtling across the chamber, his body crashing through the remnants of one of the towering pillars that lined the throne room. Shards of stone rained down upon him, but Northern refused to be cowed. He dug his way out and rose to his feet with gritting teeth and blurry vision. Blood streamed down his forehead and brows, making his already ruined vision worse. But it was still amazing how he could just tell. More like every fiber of his body knew where to turn to as another torrent if black flames surged towards him. Northern jerked his entire body to the side, stepping away from the path of the flames. But in that moment, a grotesque, uneven figure appeared behind him. One of his eyes was closed because of the blood, so there was no way to know. The monster had managed to appear at his blind side. Night Terror's talons tore through his chest as he twisted his body to block, carving deep grooves in his skin and eliciting fresh spurts of blood. Northern cried out in agony, his steps faltering as the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Damn! Is this the end? Everything seemed to be fading. The world entered a zone of ultra-silence. He almost couldn't even hear his own voice. Had he really failed? I can't die. I don't want to die. Northern's mind was tugged heavily with that single thought. and it resounded over and over again as Northern was slowly losing control of his senses. Finally, the loud sound in his head ignited a spark of resolution that quickly turned into a wellspring and overwhelmed him completely, reminding him of his terrific fear for death and oblivion. He had tasted it before, and he hated it. I still have a lot to do in this world. Hell, in no way I'm dying yet, Northern let out viciously. Northern shot his eyes open forcibly. The strain immediately threatened to rid him of his vision, but he dove out of Night Terror's range and readying his sword to dive back in, but was sent flying away like a ragdoll by a tremendous explosion of force that surrounded the evolving terror. In that moment, however, a new world was unveiled before his eyes. As Northern tumbled through the ground and tried to stand, his eyes radiated with a heavenly blue glow, shimmering brighter than before. It was like the beauty of the sea captured into the corner-less borders of his eyeballs. You have unlocked Liel. Eyes of the Unseeing. More information. Eyes of the Unseeing is the ability imbued in all eyes that makes it to transcend the common sight and peer into the ethereal strings that are shrouded by the cloak of reality. With this eyes perceiving weakness is just a start of what you can do. Northern, of course, had no time to read through this information. Luckily, the system whispered the same things into his ear. Northern's eyes dove forward, dread wearing thin on his facial features. As if the universe suddenly was working against him, as if it just wanted him dead at all cost. Night Terror's evolution finally came to a successful end. Chapter 106. Northern prevailed. However, Northern's eyes widened a second later. They were now clearer after the system's voice announced his splendid progress. Which was why he clearly saw it. A fleeting weakness, a momentary lapse in the beast's defenses as its body contorted and reshaped itself. Northern didn't hesitate. With a shout that echoed through the halls, he launched himself forward, the Soul Taker trailing streaks of azure light as he closed the distance. Night Terror's formative tendrils were currently folding within, carving the finishing path of a second body and molding out what looked like a second pair of arms. Northern suddenly became fast. Not only was he able to see so clearly, but the blue world of endless strings made it so easy for him to walk through. Northern was currently threading on the perception of the hidden foundation that weaved reality itself. He was currently seeing the true essence of everything in this room. As such, everything about him temporarily entered a transcended state. Northern temporarily could best utilize himself in synchronization with everything in his surrounding, even the air. He zapped across the distance, leaving trails of blue streaks as his form reached the stalwart Dark Terror. Just as its form completed its new shape, the ghostly blade found its mark, burying itself deep within Night Terror's chest with a sickening crunch. Northern could hear Ull's voice as he impaled the monster. Evolution complete. Rift has evolved to Tier V, and his system, evolution complete. Catastrophic Hellion Night Terror has evolved to Devilish Hellion Dark Terror. The terror let out a deafening bellow of agony, its massive form convulsing violently as the Soul Takers dug deep into its core. For the briefest of moments, the world seemed to hold its breath as the monster's movement slowed. The fine blade became pitch black as it completely sucked out all of Night Terror's void essence. The monster's body slowly withered and crumbled to its feet. Then a voice resounded in Northern's ears. A voice that filled him with so much joy even though his vision suddenly became pitch black and he collapsed to the ground unable to move an inch of his body. Congratulations! You have killed Devilish Hellion Dark Terror. Finally! Northern rejoiced in his mind. Even the system sounded happy to give this announcement. You have gained an heroic rank item. You have gained plus 12 talent fragments. You have reached 1,000 talent fragments. Your soul is evolving. You have absorbed a vestige of the Chaos Prince. You have gained 3 new attributes. You have destroyed the Rift's soul core. Rift have been swallowed by limitless void. The area of limitless void has grown. There was so much information the system wanted to pass, but Northern's consciousness was slowly giving out. An intense tear ripped the space in the middle of the throne room and it began to burn fervently with blue essence. A couple of humans cautiously stepped out of it with their armors ringing in a melody of metal. They all stopped in front of the gate and looked around the room, their faces growing pale with beads of sweat. What could have happened here? A bearded man, looking his late 40s, muttered. The others looked around, carefully investigating the surroundings. The whole squad all went in different directions. When they got out of the throne room and saw the sea of lifeless monsters that filled the ground, their faces contorted with greater fear. What could have killed these enormous amounts of monsters? While those inside carefully studied what was left of the throne room. Cracked floors, fractured walls, and shattered pillars were what told the story of what had happened a couple of minutes, perhaps hours ago. "Captain, I found a survivor." Immediately the vibrant voice soared. Everyone in the room, no matter their direction, all converged towards the source of the voice. Especially Annette, who flashed across with a level of speed she usually won't display even during battle. "I think he's breathing," the boy said to her as she appeared next to him. Even he was surprised by how fast she had arrived. But he brushed it off. This was a dire situation for everyone. He looked at the body of the boy laying on the ground in the puddle of its own blood with crude lacerations decorating its frame. "Do you think he could have single-handedly caused all this?" The boy's words froze as he saw the expression on Annette's face. He had known her for over 6 months. She was a very fearsome warrior and had proved herself in battles. She was well respected despite having a very rude character. No one would dare to defy or challenge her. And he'd swear he knew her to be a cold-hearted lady, one that never changes her facial expression. Regardless of what happens, her cold glare always remained the same. However, right now, Gilbert and the others surrounded the two of them. Immediately, a frown etched upon the man's face. The confused boy looked at Annette and looked at the headmaster. Definitely, he wasn't the only one in this situation. All of them probably felt the same mixture of emotions as they watched Annette crumble to her knees and pick up the boy shouting. Smiling, the green-haired boy gently walked out of the crowd. "Master N, you don't need to shout before I can hear you," he chimed to her with a small smile. Every other time, she probably would have picked a fight with him and tried to beat him up, but she didn't seem to be up for that today. "Heal him," she commanded. Graham slowly opened his eyes and looked at the headmaster. Gilbert nodded for him to go ahead. He looked at Annette and then looked at the boy in her arms, studying the wounds on his body. "I don't understand how he is even breathing with this much wound on his body. He's practically a living corpse. You think I give a damn? Heal the damn thing. Every last piece of wound on his body." Yeah, but we'll need to step out of the realm first," he responded and shrugged her away, retreating towards the rift. As he did, Raven frowned and looked around. Gilbert also sighed. Then he announced it to the rest who hadn't noticed. "The rift is closing. Grab anything useful and let's get out of this place." He cast a long gaze on Annette's back as she walked forward, carrying the sole survivor of this rift in her arms. "Grandmaster Ruffsburg, I don't know why, but I feel your nemesis has just been born." A smile curled his lips as he mumbled to himself. Chapter 107. The Strange Stranger. "This is crazy. I don't understand how he is even alive," Graham said with a puzzled frown straining his face. After bringing Northern out of the rift, he began examining him under the persistent command of Annette. He didn't know who this young man could have been to have the cold-hearted drunkard change so much. For the few minutes that Northern had been brought in, Annette had spoken more than she had in the past 6 months. The identity of this person bothered not only him but almost every member of the cohort. He was the sole survivor of the rift that was growing. There was so many questions he needed to answer. Questions like, how long had he been in the rift? Who killed those monsters they saw in the castle? And who is he? Is he even a student like them? Letting out a sigh, Graham brushed away all the thoughts and decided to do what he was asked. Graham was not particularly a healer, nor did he have a healing-based talent. It was just a talent ability he received after reaching the nomad rank a few months ago. Of course, unlike Northern, Graham was from a noble family. The son of a count who is a well-respected diplomat in the nation of Pyrl Doria. As such, he was provided with more than enough resources for growth. Despite how promising his talent was, Braham had failed the academy entrance exam for reasons he would not tell anyone, but was later rescouted by the former principal. Even before being scouted, he had been into rifts 3 times. He was already on the verge of entering the nomad rank. He had an edge over everyone, well, except one person. Braham took the container that was next to him and closed his eyes. The container was filled with sand. As his hands came upon it, something from the embrace of the sand began to shimmer with green glow. In a second, a seed sprouted out sand and bloomed into a yellow star-shaped flower. Braham placed the container on Northern's chest and exhaled slowly. Then he placed his hands on his laps and closed his eyes one more time. The petals of the flower began to fall and the green stem stretched wider, becoming a vine that slowly crawled over Northern's body, branching out of each other and running over his war-torn armor to touch every part of his body. When the vine had encased Northern's body in whole, the healing process was to start. But Braham suddenly opened his eyes and frowned, a drop of sweat running down his face. He watched the vine get corrupted, turning from vibrant green to purplish-black and withering into crumbs. A strained smile parted his lips. What the hell is this bastard? No soul core? No soul essence, but I can tell he is freaking strong. Braham shrugged and stood up, bending out of the tent where others stood. Annette looked at him intensely as he came out and asked, "Are you done?" Braham allowed a small smile, looked at her and shifted his gaze to the headmaster before responding. "Something about him is refusing my healing essence. I don't know. But I think he'll be fine on his own. His body is that ruined and yet somehow, he is breathing." Gilbert nodded and touched his shoulder. "Thank you, Braham." He faced the others and addressed them. "Let's return to the castle while we wait for him to wake up. For now there's little we can do. We have no choice but to wait until he is awake to know the situation of things." They all nodded in agreement. Different sparks ignited their eyes. Seeing that flood of monster corpse, they couldn't but be so happy. They were so fortunate not to have faced those hordes themselves. Maybe the Legion would not have even made it back. They were just so happy. And again they found a survivor. Not every time does one find a survivor in this desolation swarming with monsters. In a couple of hours, the Legion were already marching back to Lothellowen. A few shoulders carried slain monsters and a wolf, not minding as their body was smeared by dark blood. Northern's eyes slid open. A vast darkness filled with ethereal glows of different colors stretched far and wide his surrounding. It was like he was floating in it, but he could feel his legs standing on something sturdy. Perhaps that was the ground. However, this ground was not different from the darkness that surrounded him. Everywhere was the same, and strangely, felt so familiar. Northern could guess, although he was not sure. Limitless void. This was the first time he was finding himself in it. Ah, that's right, I defeated Night Terror. I must have absorbed the other vestige of the Chaos Prince when I did. He looked around. I suppose everything is now complete in me, Northern murmured, touching his chest. Like he had said, he could feel something vast and hollow within himself. It was strong and incredibly powerful. Northern just could tell that he had grown so much from killing Night Terror. But the best was yet to come. The area suddenly shuddered and began to break apart. "Ha! What is happening?" Northern's voice wavered. Fear gripped his heart as he saw cracks running across the darkness. The space trembled powerfully. Limitless void, as he thought it to be, was breaking apart. However, his fears completely disappeared after seeing the system's notification. "Congratulations! Your soul has evolved. You have become a drifter. All talent abilities can now be used however you want. All weapon abilities can now be used however you want. All attributes of copied talent have been unsealed and are taking root in your soul. Your copied talent have been converted to own talent. A new talent slot has been added. You have absorbed the second vestige of the Chaos Prince. A change is happening in your soul. You have gained 3 new attributes." As these torrent of messages from the system flooded his vision, The breaking scenery finally shattered and Northern found himself standing in a dark, colossal hall. The hall stretched endlessly, devoid of light. Towering pillars, immense as ancient redwoods, lined the sides in solemn rows, holding aloft the vaulted ceiling high overhead. Intricate patterns were meticulously engraved into the arching stone canopy above, details barely discernible in the enveloping gloom. At the farthing end of the vast hall, a short flight of stairs led up to a throne, though throne seemed an inadequate term for the colossal seat. It loomed ahead, constructed on a scale befitting the residence of a titanic giant, with armrests extending like the wings of a slumbering dragon. Yet before the stairs crested, an impenetrable wall of undulating black flames barred further progress, illuminating the shadowy space in a ghostly danse macabre. The floor itself was as smooth as a dark mirror, reflecting the flicking shadows in haunting distortion across its glassy surface. An oppressive silence reigned over the immense hall, broken only by Northern's own breath. "What the hell?" His voice echoed endlessly through the limitless void. Chapter 108. Reaping Rewards Part 1. Profile. Name, Northern Longguard. True name, nameless. Attributes: formless, spawn of void, limitless void, vestige of chaos and void. All eyes, chaos thread, flames of chaos. Soul rank, drifter. Talent fragments, 0 out of 2000. Copied talents, 0/2. Own talents, 1. Attribute abilities, active/passive. September 10th. More information on attribute abilities. These are abilities that come from your attributes. Usually attributes are passive. This is not because they don't have an active ability, but because one's soul core is already occupied with the essence of talent, therefore leaves not much room for attributes to actualize their active abilities. However, you are without a soul core and talent, you have plenty of room in your soul to actualize your attribute abilities. When you become a drifter, attributes abilities fully form in your soul. Owned items: Mortal Blade, Eternal Twilight, Silver Sword, Death Glare, and 24 others. You have received the second vestige of the Chaos Prince. Vestige of Void. You have gained 3 new attributes. Attribute: Vestige of Chaos has merged with its other half. Attribute: Vestige of Chaos and Void has evolved to a new rank. Attributes gained have been reduced to 2. Northern lounged lazily on the massive, opulent throne. Its expansive width allowed him to stretch out, resting his head on one armrest while draping his legs over the other. Seated upon such a magnifying chair, the dancing black flames surrounding him imbued a sense of regal power, perhaps even more than a mere king. Ah, very funny. I don't see myself as that type. He dismissed the thought with a soft chuckle. Night Terror's tale was enough to instill a fear of such lofty positions. They offered immense power, seductively whispering for one to seek more until greed consumed and drove them to insanity. I think I'm the kind who loves being free from a leader's burdens. Not that I enjoy being led either. The path of a loner seems preferable. It wasn't as if he excelled at relating with others to begin with. The friends he socialized with in his past life had approached him first. When he was Elliot, Northern was merely a bookish nerd, singularly focused on becoming the best through study alone. And all that was for what? To foolishly fall for the wrong person, only to be used and discarded. He whispered somberly. It's been a while since I even dwelled on that. A faint smile graced his lips. The past is behind me. Let's strive to do better this time. For now, I want to investigate the extent of my newfound strength. An eager grin split his face. Northern sat up, crossed his legs and leaned towards the holographic panel, staring intently for a few moments. I see. So Night Terror absorbed the Vestige's attributes. Vestige of Chaos and Void, Chaos Thread, and Flames of Chaos. He studied the information intensely. Attributes: name, Flames of Chaos. Rank: Divine. Description: an ever-burning flame resides within your soul, capable of searing away inconsistencies and irregularities. Due to these ceaseless flames, your soul can never be harmed or consumed. Passive abilities: soul damage resistance, mind attack resistance. Active abilities: black flame, flame lance. A torrent of joy flooded Northern's being as he absorbed the words. He had gained resistance against the two threats that vexed him most: soul damage and mental attacks. Damn! This is getting exciting. Those vulnerabilities were now eliminated from the equation. Damn night terror. So this is why you were so arduous to kill? Northern mused. Despite using Soul Taker, the stalwart monster persevered for an unexpectedly prolonged period. Even at the end, attacking its soul proved ineffective in delivering a death blow. Initially, Northern assumed this was because he was a walker, but now, he considered the possibility that its resistance to soul assaults played a pivotal role. After all, he needn't actively engage the skill, nor meet prerequisites as with Mortal Blade. It's amazing, truly amazing. He smiled contentedly, continuing his study. Name: Chaos Thread. Rank: Mystic. Description: the indestructible strings of chaos itself hold your body together, ever vigilant to rest-stitch torn flesh and tissue. This part was devoid of passive or active abilities akin to flames of chaos, and Northern could surmise the reason. Since it's an attribute with only one passive ability, the description covers all that needs conveying. He paused, silent contemplation reigning for a few heartbeats. So, does that mean this is the healing ability I've yearned desperately for? As the realization belatedly settled in, his laughter echoed through the hollow hall. Ah, yes. Finally, he eagerly went on to the next panel. Name: Vestige of Chaos and Void. Rank: Abysmal. Description: the Chaos Prince began to dive into the he discovered, and not much he. Northern's brow arched inquisitively as he stared at the fragmented description. What's with this garbled passage? Why is it so incoherent? He scrutinized it fruitlessly for several moments before accepting its immutable state and proceeding. At least it lists passive and active abilities. Passive abilities: Void, Chaos. Active abilities: Void, Chaos. Quite confusing. With a puzzled expression, Northern commanded the system to reveal further details. A new panel materialized, displaying: Name: Void. Type: Passive. Description: Void consumes the souls of entities you slay. Name: Chaos. Type: Passive. Description: Chaos is the flow of all existential forces, tamed and untamed alike. You can perceive this chaotic flow. Name: Void. Type: Active. Description: you can choose to materialize the soul of any entity you have slain. Doing so bestows you with that soul's abilities. Name: Chaos. Type: Active. Description: you can disrupt the chaotic flow sustaining any existential being's force. With but a snap of your fingers you can unmake their existence or dispel their arts. However, a fatal flaw accompanies this ability. Flaw: a delicate balance exists between void and chaos. Utilizing void does not disturb this equilibrium, but chaos wields tremendous power. Invoking it tips the scales. If you cannot promptly restore balance after disrupting it, you may become enslaved by chaos whims rather than controlling its force. In other words, the ability begins controlling me instead of the reverse, Northern interpreted inwardly. Chapter 109. Reaping Rewards, Part 2. The ability functioned in a manner that imposed limitations to prevent the user from becoming addicted to its utilization. After all, the power to unmake a being's existence with a mere snap of one's fingers was not something to be taken lightly. Without restraint, he could devolve into a deranged fiend going about callously destroying lives and objects simply because he possessed the ability to do so. At that point, I suppose I'd be nothing more than a depraved bastard enslaved by chaos. Northern paused, scrutinizing the panel intently for a few moments. This power, it's going to bring me a great deal of trouble, he could discern. Most likely, the Chaos Prince himself had implemented the limitation to prevent overindulgence in its use. If this Chaos Prince indeed wielded such an ability, then it's no surprise he could destroy a sun. However, it also prompted Northern to question why the prince never retaliated and instead allowed himself to be shackled by the 7 maidens, embarking on a forced pilgrimage to his demise. Is he even dead? Northern pondered. That was merely the mural's culmination. It may not have been the finale of his chronicle. He sensed he was simultaneously right and wrong. The reason being, within the statue's eyes resided those orbs, the vestige of the Chaos Prince. Most likely, he either left something behind at that juncture or perished there. It remained a mere speculation. There was no certainty to be had. Honestly, this is such a hassle. I wish I don't continually encounter these occurrences. As much as Northern wished it so, if he was truthful with himself, he could sense he was destined to cross paths with remnants of the Chaos Prince again. Although he couldn't quite articulate how he knew. Perhaps fate? Shaking his head vigorously, he dismissed the notion. Stop overthinking it. Let's just revel in the present. Fact was, Northern was now mightier than he had ever been, stronger than most drifters had ever become at this rank. It would be no understatement to declare him the most formidable drifter in the entire realm of Ultrael. And most likely even Ul remained oblivious to it. Otherwise, she would have tried her utmost to diminish my capabilities. An uncharacteristic surge of brash confidence permeated his being. Is this the composure power bestows? Northern mused inwardly, a faint smile playing across his lips. And he hadn't even finished reaping the full extent of his rewards yet. This newfound might stem solely from the Chaos Prince's vestige, yet he was already this formidable? In fact, I still need to examine my other attributes and uncover what active abilities they grant. Now that I'm a drifter, they should all be revealed, right? Including the attribute from the talent I copied. A series of new dark blue panels materialized before Northern's eyes. Name: Formless. Rank: Fated. Description: a demon of development, flexibility, and adaptability. These attributes enable you to adapt effortlessly to anything: natural phenomena, states of being, mentality, or physicality. You can become anything while applying unparalleled flexibility to reshape yourself. Your formlessness absorbs others' forms into its own. Passive ability: Demon of Change. Active ability: Demon of Emulation. Name: Demon of Change. Type: Passive. Description: you are a monstrous, formless being, a demon that will not cease growing. Name: Demon of Emulation. Type: Active. Description: you can emulate anything as long as you can perceive its true essence. Northern nearly fainted upon reading the last part of that description. This ability would ordinarily pose no issue, as perceiving a true essence is an impossibility for anyone. He had heard his mother speak of it once. That everything possessed a true essence. For humans it was their soul core. The same applied to monsters and abilities, martial and spell arts, even nature itself. The reasons behind our actions embody the most rudimentary and comprehensible manifestations of true essence. Why do we cough? Why do we speak the way we do? Why is someone limping? Why does one prefer fighting with their right hand over the left? Those explanations represent the most mundane interpretations of what a true essence entails. However, to truly perceive it required seeing with one's eyes. Yet it was ostensibly impossible to visually discern those truths. They merely governed the boundaries of common sense. Sadly, common sense became useless in this case, because, mere days or moments ago, Northern had unlocked an integral aspect of his eyes. Eyes of the Unseeing. More information. Eyes of the Unseeing is the ability imbued within all eyes that transcends common sight to peer into the ethereal strings shrouded by reality's cloak. With these eyes, perceiving weakness and discerning the true essence of something is just the beginning of what you can accomplish. Northern covered his face as his shoulders began to tremble, peering into the ethereal strands veiled by reality's shroud, perceiving weaknesses, discerning the true essence. What other explanation did he need to offer himself? At this point, he felt an urge to jump and shout in jubilation. I'm certain Ul bestowed this ability upon me of her own volition, or perhaps I received it due to perfect body. Either way, I don't care. This may very well be my most potent ability. If it was indeed Ul who granted him this trait, then even she was unaware of the grave mistake she had made. This was an ability meant to be a failure. From conversing like a human to walking like them, fighting like them, effortlessly copying spell arts and martial techniques, Northern had just become overwhelmingly overpowered. I wonder what other surprises await me. Hee. Northern licked his lips eagerly as he continued examining the panels. Name, all eyes. Rank, divine. Description, an extremely rare genetic trait appearing once every 10 generations. As of now, not much is known about your esoteric blue eyes. Passive ability, eternal gaze, perfect body. Active ability, Liel, eyes of the unseeing. Indeed, I remembered correctly. Northern carved a sly smile as he verified it matched his recollection. Then he scrutinized the next panel. Name, Spawn of Void. Rank, Mystic. Description, you are a spawn of void, enabling you to detect and manipulate void essence to an immense degree. Active ability, Void Force. Name, Void Force. Type, active. Description, you can materialize an invisible defensive field around yourself using void essence. This field renders all attacks useless. Name, Limitless Void. Rank, Mystic. Description, Limitless Void is a metaphysical realm existing within your soul. Active ability, Limitless Void. Name, Limitless Void. Type, active. Description, within your soul dwells a metaphysical world. You can store items and individuals in this realm. Furthermore, you can manifest this world to temporarily or permanently occupy a plane of reality. Additional information. Souls consumed by void come to reside in this world. You can summon them by uttering their names. Currently, 2 souls inhabit the void.
Kol, Alter.
Dark Terror. Chapter 110. Reaping Rewards, Part 3. Yikes! An overwhelming torrent of information and excitement inundated Northern's mind. So much to process, so much cause for exhilaration. He could potentially become either of those 2 beings? Northern yearned to summon them immediately, but not yet. He was not finished exploring the full breadth of his newfound rewards. Let's unveil the main course. This, after all, was the catalyst for his arduous journey thus far. The reason he had so fervently anticipated his evolution. Northern's gaze returned to the largest panel floating prominently amidst the smaller ones. Profile. Name, Northern Longguard. True name, Nameless. Attributes, Formless. Spawn of Void. Limitless Void. Vestige of Chaos and Void. All Eyes. Chaos Thread. Flames of Chaos. Soul Rank, Drifter. Talent Fragments, 0 out of 2000. Copied Talents, 0/2. Own Talents, 1. Attribute Abilities, Active/Passive. September 10th. Owned Items, Mortal Blade, Eternal Twilight, Silver Sword, Death Glare, and 24 others. As Northern focused on a particular set of letters, a satisfied grin reformed across his features. Finally, it's gone. He had grown immensely weary of seeing Walker listed there. Now all that remains is ranking up, he speculated, shifting his scrutiny to the next line. The talent fragments have increased to 2,000, he commented. And I have 2 free slots for copied talents. There's also a new entry, Own Talent. Northern frowned pensively for a moment. I thought I would merely gain 1 additional slot, but 2 more is incredible. And I'm guessing my former copied talent transitioned to owned? To confirm, Northern clicked on the Own Talents prompt. Immediately, a new panel materialized over it. Own Talent 1. Talent. Singularity. Class. S. Talent. True. Name. Me, myself, and I. Description. I am the only one, it is me, myself, and I. All others strengthen me. Talent ability. Soul clone. Attributes. All the same. You can now view the information of attributes from copied talents. Talent progression. 0 out of 1000. Additional information. All copied talents upon soul evolution are integrated into your soul and become own talents. Northern's eyes widened, sparkling with azure stars.
Oi.
Oh, You're telling me if I reach my next rank, I'll have 3 own talents and 3 slots for copied talents? Then the rank after that, I'd possess 6 own talents and 4 copied talent slots? This is massive. He washed his face with his palms, closing his eyes tightly before slowly peeking through parted fingers to reconfirm. Maybe I'm dreaming, yet the same information remained, immutable. The same strings of letters, the same staggering rewards. All this, and I had to become a drifter to receive it. His true strength had been obscured by the limitations of being a mere walker. Being a walker was akin to existing in a larval state. Now, he had experienced a complete metamorphosis, unveiling the unbelievable potential to become the world's mightiest entity. But coupled with this, Northern trailed off briefly. He was not finished, not yet. 2 matters remained to inspect. Northern gulped audibly. At this rate, he was growing overwhelmed by the onslaught of revelations. I'd welcome something mundane for a change. Talent attribute. Name. All the same. Rank. Unique. Description. We are all the same. This attribute allows you to maintain equal power with all clones. Upon evolution, it now permits endless creation of clones sharing the same prowess. Active ability. Create clone. Additional information. Attribute abilities should not manifest. However, since you lack a core, it has been actualized. The attribute ability exists to preserve the talent's true nature. This is quite baffling. I made a wrong decision, that is. Northern realized he had erred in choosing a singular clone over an endless quantity. But unable to discern the attribute's information at the time, he naturally assumed greater numbers would diminish individual quality. It seems I was mistaken. However, this attribute rectifies that oversight. Northern exhaled slowly. Does this imply talent attributes exist to uphold talent's inherent natures? Currently lacking an answer, the question gnawed at him. What role did attributes play in relation to talents and soul cores? And also, are soul cores a limitation? Because no core formed within his soul, Northern became a defective existence, devoid of talent. Yet in exchange, he could actively wield the abilities of his attributes. At this juncture, Northern began viewing the soul core as a constraint rather than a source of power for drifters. He sighed heavily and turned his focus to the final entry. This was the last of his rewards, the one he would not forget. I gained an item after slaying Night Terror. I can't wait to discover what it is. Northern grinned eagerly as he summoned the item's details. Item. Name. Night Terror. Type. Armor. Rank. Heroic. Order. 4. Description. A king driven mad by avarice for power became an entity of destruction. He met a human and they shared an adventure together. Upon his demise, he bequeathed his body as a metallic vessel to serve and safeguard his human companion. Northern nearly retched upon reading that description. He glared down at the diligently floating panel, leaning forward as outrage spilled forth. What is this? Friend? Adventure? Who went adventuring with whom? What about the part where he tried to kill me, you damn system? Twice. That monster attempted to murder me twice. Pulling back, Northern folded his arms indignantly. Nonsense. Pure nonsense. You must be joking with me. Who knew the system also possessed an amazing sense of humor? Despite Northern's tantrum, no new panel manifested. The remaining information patiently awaited his perusal. Of course, the system had never behaved as a freely communicative entity since their first encounter. It only responded based on his commands or when specific requirements were met. Northern knew better than to anticipate a reply. Instead, he studied the rest of the details intently. Weapon abilities: Stalwart, Induce Fear, Night Terror, Eyes of a Terror, Stalwart. This armor is practically indestructible. Any weapon of lower rank cannot pierce through. Induce Fear. When donning this armor, a crippling fear is induced in those around you. The far weaker may lose consciousness due to extreme fear. Night Terror. This armor's true might manifests at night or in darkness. Your presence becomes undetectable. A terror of utter darkness weaving through the shadows as you reap blood and break necks. Eyes of a Terror. This armor possesses 4 eyes, 2 for you, 2 for itself. In extreme situations, the armor can perceive unperceivable attacks and reflexively take momentary control of your body to react. The last one, the notion of something else controlling him, even the armor now under his ownership, kindled skepticism within Northern. Night Terror was the catalyst for so much of his suffering, that indomitable monster marking both the beginning and bitter end. Having its armor seize control of his body, even fleetingly, felt traumatic. Suddenly, Northern's features settled into a pensive frown. Come now, you are not a child. Night Terror is deceased. This is an incredible armor. He paused, glancing around furtively before dipping his head slightly. Thank you, Night Terror, for the gift. It felt extraordinarily bizarre yet somehow appropriate. Since the monster's soul resides here, who knows what ill could befall me if I remained ungrateful after receiving such a memento? Northern smiled wanly and dismissed all the panels. Now, let's see how this armor looks. Chapter 111. Something Terrible. Tendrils of dark mist enveloped Northern's body as glistening black tapes deftly wove themselves around his form. For a fleeting moment, he could scarcely discern what was unfolding, despite his eyes clearly observing the shimmering obsidian ribbons dancing across his skin. An intricate, mechanized black armor composed of segmented onyx metal plates slithered into place over his pale flesh, bestowing an angular, futuristic aesthetic. The ebon steel plating possessed an almost supernatural luster, the surfaces so infinitely dark they seemed to absorb all light. The suit enveloped much of Northern's body, revealing an imposing visage. Across various sections, glowing azure energy conduits emanated an eerie radiance. These illuminated lines followed the contours and geometric patterns of the armor, accentuating its sharp facets. On the chest area, a pair of larger glowing blue elements stood out prominently, reminiscent of a dragon's smoldering eyes. Additional armored pieces adorned his shoulders, forearms, and a tail curled out of his lower body. The helmet seamlessly fused with the neckpiece, 2 vicious horns twisting forth from its crown. For eerie blue eyes, alight with an unsettling glow, gazed out upon their surroundings. Northern flexed his fingers, assessing any potential restrictions to his mobility. Smooth, apart from its ethereal lightness, the armor moved with him like a second skin, sleek and unencumbering. If anything, his movements felt more fluid than usual. With a mere thought, Northern dismissed the helmet. They folded inward with practiced efficiency, coalescing into a collar at his neckline, while those 2 devilish horns remained affixed to his head. Unable to visually confirm their presence, his fingers traced the lustrous curves. Crap, am I a devil now? Northern surveyed his environs once more, intending to explore one final facet of his newfound abilities. However, an anomalous occurrence disrupted his plans. Someone entered the chamber he occupied in reality, and for some inexplicable reason, he could sense their presence. Dismissing the Night Terror armor, he postponed further experimentation. For now, he needed to assess this unusual situation. Thus, he transitioned back to the plane of reality, gently opening his eyes. For the first few minutes after regaining consciousness, Northern kept his eyes firmly shut, steadying his breathing to avoid any noticeable changes from his unconscious state. Even the slightest variation in his respiration pattern had caused the woman seated beside his bed to swiftly turn her head. But upon perceiving no further fluctuations with his eyes closed, she sighed and looked away. As perceptive as ever, he mused inwardly. He needed no visual confirmation to identify her. The lingering scent of alcohol and fiery vermilion tresses were unmistakable. He felt an unexpected swell of relief that Instructor Annette was the first to greet him upon awakening. "I suppose I've truly returned home, eh?" After Annette departed, Northern opened his eyes and sat upright, momentarily closing them once more before surveying his surroundings. Nothing particularly remarkable. His bed sat central within the modest chamber, dilapidated furnishings scattered haphazardly. The floor and walls were constructed of interlocked brick. A solitary window to his left filtered in meager rays through white-veiled curtains, casting minimal illumination into one corner while shrouding the rest in shadow. Darkness held no impediment for Northern's sight. His perception of the world remained unparalleled and constant, transcending mere light and dark. He could also sense his environs, though this wasn't a feature of all eyes. Perhaps an effect of his attributes? Or simply his newfound ability to manipulate void essence had granted such discernment. His very physicality felt lighter now. It could be due to the evolution. Northern pondered briefly before his thoughts drifted to the number of individuals he sensed nearby. Breathing patterns and footsteps provided the telltale signs. "Why are there so many people here?" The question nagged internally. "I suppose I should investigate," he murmured, rising cautiously and slipping out the door. Peering out first to ensure the corridor was clear, Northern emerged into a dimly lit, narrow hallway with regularly spaced doors lining the walls, undoubtedly more private quarters. The layout was familiar, reminiscent of structures he had inhabited before being relocated to the tower. "If I follow this path, I should reach the exterior." His intention was to ascertain precisely how many individuals occupied this place, a curiosity piqued upon initially waking and sensing the multitude of respirations and footfalls. After a brief sojourn, Northern emerged onto a balcony protruding from the main throne hall's upper levels. It seemed a vantage point from which a sovereign would address their subjects. A troubled frown creased his features as an unorthodox, perplexing scene unfolded before him. What is this? Makeshift tents sprouted haphazardly across the immense chamber's floor, while huddled groups conversed in tattered attire. Some drifted toward the exit, their purpose unclear. "Why are there so many people here?" he mentally stammered, gripping the balcony's edge as trepidation blossomed. Northern had been certain departing the rift would return him to his home. Being sent there without consent implied he would be promptly returned upon completing that objective. Or so he'd always assumed. Yet now, his heart quailed as a disquieting premonition took root, that something far worse may have transpired. He could even discern individuals around his age, familiar faces from their academy entrance day. All of them looked ragged, rough, with different patches of metal plates adorning their forms. Some he could perceive were strong and others, not worth his attention. At a glance, he spotted a black-haired girl garbed in black armor with a crimson cloak striding beside a white-haired companion in a sleek white ensemble. The latter's gaze suddenly met his before the raven-tressed woman followed suit. Northern's expression contorted into a horrified scowl. "Crap! Something is horribly wrong here. I can feel it. Something terrible has happened." Chapter 112. Getting Answers, Part 1. Northern gazed down upon the main hall, eyes brimming with dread. His fears carried horrific premonitions cascading through his mind as he observed each individual below. The girl and her companion who had briefly met his stare now turned a corner, disappearing down another hallway. This vast edifice undoubtedly harbored a labyrinth of passages. "North boy, you're finally awake." His eyes widened as a gruff voice called out from behind. Whirling to face the owner, he found himself swiftly enveloped in a tight embrace. Annette wrapped her arms around him, eyes closed in a delighted smile. In contrast, Northern's features strained into a troubled frown. He considered pulling away, but her grip proved surprisingly secure. Not that exerting genuine effort would fail to dislodge her, but still, wrinkling his nose, he endured the impromptu reunion as Annette seemed to relish the moment. Then a low whisper escaped his lips. "You reek." Annette's eyes flew open as she shoved him back harshly. "Huh? That's how you address someone worried sick over you?" Northern glanced around briefly before refocusing on her with an icy stare. "Don't they have baths in this place?" Annette's brows rose and twitched with indignation. "Forget worrying over him. I'll break this brat." She was already quite accustomed to Northern's brusque demeanor, so it didn't really surprise her. He's the only one that could talk to her around here and get away with it. He did outsmart her once with that damned ability of his. "I'm being so easy on him. Is it because I evaluated him? He's the only kid I kind of like around here." Or maybe she afforded him excessive leeway out of pity, suspecting him to be an unwitting pawn in Ruffsberg's schemes. She could have also taken a liking to him after seeing his father once at the Citadel. After all, Shin's dashing looks made him quite the heartthrob among female drifters in his youth. The number of scandalous dalliances before finally settling with Aisha would surprise many. A deep frown etched Northern's features, commanding Annette's attention once more. With a resigned sigh, she addressed him with arms akimbo. "I've been so worried about you. I have searched everywhere for you. To think you've been inside a rift all this while." His gaze lingered briefly toward the makeshift shelters before refocusing on her, suspicion tinging his tone. "Where is this place? Did something happen? Who are all these people?" Annette stared blankly for a few heartbeats as realization dawned. "He doesn't know. Of course not. He's been in a rift all the while. Will you answer me or just keep gawking?" Northern grunted impatiently. "You need to fix that appalling disrespect. Then and even now, you speak like I am your mate." Annette chided. Northern arched a brow, belatedly acknowledging the truth of her words. "Crap. I must automatically view her as an equal." Sometimes he slipped, instinctively reverting to his Elliot persona and forgetting his current circumstances. With the endless gauntlet in the rift, he could scarcely recall ever being Elliot at all. Given the relentless trials each day, what use was there in dwelling on his former life as a 20-something-year-old successful engineer? Even now, a part of him wished to discard that notion entirely and start fresh, experiencing a true childhood like his peers. But straying down that path served no purpose here. Not when dread whispered that something catastrophic had transpired, demanding immediate answers. "I'm sorry, that was out of line. I'm just agitated," he amended gruffly. Annette had scant familiarity with the real Northern, but this thoughtful apology seemed incongruous with the smug, overconfident brat she once met. She could only attribute the shift to one factor. He must have had his fair share hardship. A wistful smile graced her lips. Hardships possessed an unparalleled ability to humble even the most inflated egos, often without the victim's awareness. In her eyes, Northern had evolved from a petulant brat into a more pensive, if still occasionally brusque, individual. A transformation only achievable through being repeatedly forced to confront life and death trials. Or perhaps she was merely projecting her own assumptions onto his actions. "But I still need to know. What's happening here?" He remained resolute as the frown slowly resurfaced. His newly tempered demeanor didn't preclude blunt insistence when warranted. "Allow me to explain," a baritone voice interjected. Northern turned, eyes widening at the sight of the approaching figure. "What's going on here? Headmaster Gilbert?" The wizened man offered a wistful smile. "I imagine you're quite curious as to where we are and why we are here. Shall we discuss this privately?" His gaze shifted toward the vermilion-haired woman. She scowled in response. A contemplative silence fell as Northern scrutinized the palpable tension between them before fixing Gilbert with a determined look. "All right then. They had better have a damn reasonable explanation for why this place looks like the aftermath of obliteration. Gilbert turned to depart, but Northern paused, glancing back at Annette. "Aren't you coming?" She shrugged dismissively. "That old dog would not want me there." Northern arched a reproachful brow. "For someone who just chastised me about disrespect, you're far worse." Annette recoiled as if physically struck. "This brat, hardship or not, he hasn't changed a bit." Refocusing on Gilbert, Northern stated bluntly, "Is it all right if Instructor Annette joins us?" Though phrased as a question, his severe expression allowed no protest. Gilbert waved them forward before disappearing through the hallway, back where Northern had emerged from earlier. After a brief trek past the room he woke up in, they reached the corridor's end, a set of ornate double doors. Gilbert pushed them open, ushering them into a modest receiving room. Annette immediately claimed a sofa, crossing her legs as Northern positioned himself before her. Gilbert leaned against the table opposite, exhaling deeply. "So?" Northern's gravelly prompt shattered the taut silence. "Currently," Gilbert began slowly, "we are not in the Central Plains. We've been transported to the dark continent Stelia, the Starlock continent in common language." Thud. Northern's composure shattered instantly, his expression contorting into a dark, murderous scowl that seemed to bore straight through Gilbert's soul. The elder's eyes flew wide as an icy chill gripped him. Bloodlust. Tendrils of primal fear crept up his spine. Before he could so much as draw his blade, Northern had already closed the distance, a black dagger now pressing precariously against Gilbert's jugular, drawing a bead of crimson. "Were you in on it too? What useless crap is you and the principal planning to do?" Northern inquired with the cold, ferocious glare of an experienced killer. Chapter 113. Getting Answers, Part 2. Annette's jaw dropped, her eyes wide with disbelief. What? As a master, she had graduated from being a regular drifter. The true journey of realizing a drifter's power and might began when they entered the vagrant rank and became masters. Their soul essence became much more potent, enabling abilities like spiritual release. A vast repertoire of new abilities opened before them. Not just that, but their senses of perception and physical capabilities heightened incredibly. They could hear 10 times better than a regular drifter, their bodies restructured and imbued with extraordinary strength. Their talents took unique routes, setting them apart from the rest. This made masters exceptionally formidable opponents. In other words, they were the beginning of what it truly meant to be a drifter. There was no way a regular drifter's movements should have escaped Annette's keen eyes. Distracted or not, it was simply not possible. A bead of sweat trickled down her flushed face as she froze mid-motion, almost standing up. All she felt was a gust of wind. She hadn't even seen the boy move at all. This makes absolutely no sense. Northern's speed was terrifying, defying any reasonable explanation. She would have assumed he possessed a speed-based talent if she hadn't witnessed his cloning ability firsthand herself. Come to think of it, he was also fast that day, but not enough for me to worry. Back then, Annette had merely considered Northern physically impressive for his age. Still, this view is so nice. A sly smile curled her lips as she settled back into the plush sofa. Northern shot Gilbert a sidelong glance, pressing the black stiletto against his throat before he could move. "Answer me!" Northern shouted furiously, the wind whipping violently around them, carrying his anger. Gilbert met the boy's gaze with indifference, though cautious. "He's strong, powered by rage and fury. It's understandable how he surprised me like that. He could easily turn the situation around, but that would be unfair to this enraged young man." With a sigh he spoke. "Young one, I don't understand." "Don't you dare deny it," Northern interrupted, increasing the pressure of the blade, a trickle of blood snaking down Gilbert's throat. "You think I'm stupid?" On the evaluation day, the way Ruffsberg looked at me, I could tell that crappy bastard had something up his sleeve. and the teleportation spell art in the hall where we waited was the same as the one he used to bring me to you on that flying ship. Gilbert's eyes widened, giving him away. Narrowing his eyes to icy azure slits, Northern pressed on. Judging by your reaction, I'm right. After Ruffsburg left your place, you abandoned the Citadel and came to the Academy. I don't know why I found myself in some rift, but I can guess why you're here with the other students. He lifted his chin defiantly as Northern continued. You're using us, aren't you? I don't know what you guys are up to, but I'm sure you're using us against our parents' consent. Gilbert held Northern's fiery gaze for a few tense seconds before exhaling slowly. Northern instantly leapt back, soaring over 5 meters in a single reflexive jump to land where he'd started. Even Annette couldn't help but be amazed. His jump is massive. To anyone else, it might have seemed ordinary, but Annette or any master would have recognized that Northern had reacted instinctively to Gilbert's spiritual release. It wasn't even an intentional jump. His legs were like coiled springs. If I had not moved away, I would have lost my hand. Northern eyed the hand clutching the stiletto. It wasn't a bluff like Instructor Annette's earlier. It would have really severed my hand. The realization struck him. I may have grown stronger, but these bastards are powerful in their own ways. With their different talents, they'll be incredibly hard to kill. He cut off that train of thought abruptly. Am I actually considering how to kill a bunch of humans? He was so accustomed to killing for self-preservation that the thought came naturally, even when no one posed an immediate threat. At least not yet. Dismissing his dagger, he exhaled softly through pursed lips. Gilbert's voice rang out. While you're correct about certain things, you're also mistaken about others. I'm not obligated to inform you of anything except what pertains to our survival on this treacherous continent. He wiped the blood from his neck with a black handkerchief, dropping it onto the table. Now, will you allow me to bring you up to date on the current situation and how we can return home? Annette frowned at his words but stayed silent. Speaking to the old man previously had proved futile. Right now, she just wanted to escape this place and cut all ties. To her, Gilbert had gone from an iconic figure she admired to a senseless lapdog over the past few months. Of course, she didn't know the depth of his connection to Ruffsburg, nor did she care. The Gilbert she thought she knew was a man who stood up for the weak, no matter the opposition. Now, she wasn't even sure what she knew anymore. I would still like to know, though. Northern's casual tone was at odds with the lingering aura of danger around his deceptively relaxed demeanor. Were you all sent to a rift like me? Gilbert studied him for a few moments, finding the sudden mood shift strange, before responding,
No.
Of all of us, you were the only one. Northern smiled, though there was nothing warm about the expression. All right, now you can brief me on the current situation and how we can go back home. Gilbert frowned. That smile is deeply disturbing. I can't read him at all. Even Annette eyed him with surprise. She could tell he was up to something, though she couldn't discern what. And again, she couldn't get over the level of composure he maintained. While seated behind him, she had considered every possible attack pattern. But Northern remained so composed that they all proved futile in her mind. He had no openings. She couldn't help but wonder, what in the world happened to you in that rift? Chapter 114. Northern is a sly fox. Northern paid rapt attention as Gilbert began speaking. 7 months ago we all came to Stelia. I'm guessing that was around the same time you entered the rift you just closed down. Gilbert looked directly at Northern as he continued. This place where we're currently stationed is known as the Lotheloan Kingdom. It had previously been lost to a horde of monsters. When we arrived, we needed somewhere to settle, but everywhere was swarming with those beasts. So I took the initiative and led the students here. Together, we were able to slay the monsters and reclaim this portion of the kingdom, including the castle. He paused briefly. Much later, we began receiving refugees, natives of Lotheloan, and neighboring clans who had lost their homes to the monsters' onslaught. They filled us in on the state of affairs and how the rifts came to be. Gilbert's voice trailed off as he explained the rift's emergence to Northern, the grave threat they posed, and the fact that they were growing in tier. However, he omitted great details such as the existence of other student groups who had arrived earlier and formed strongholds elsewhere. Many had perished, but the survivors were now loyal mercenaries to the only country that had withstood the disaster. He even neglected to mention that one country had endured the disaster. Not that he wanted or needed to divulge everything to Northern. In fact, telling him this much already made Gilbert feel as though he was treating the young man like some special guest, a notion he despised. It caused him to be more guarded, withholding other key information. Finally, he told Northern about how their stronghold operated. We have 10 parties, each comprising 2 teams of 4 drifters. The 10 parties are led by the strongest drifters, handpicked by me personally. Their mission is to hunt monsters, which serve as a food source, while the soul cores are used to trade with other strongholds for vital items and amenities needed for daily survival. He looked squarely at Northern. My plan is to close down all rifts and return home victorious. To make Mama proud? Northern interjected brutally, his expression one of disdain. Arching a bushy brow, the burly man scrutinized Northern with a scowl. I'm not sure what you mean? Northern folded his arms across his chest. I don't understand why you're aiming to close all the rifts before finding a way back home. Who exactly do you intend to impress? He glared at Gilbert, defiant. The priority right now should be getting us home. Don't you have families you want to see? Anger tinged his voice. We have a chance to save these people. The rifts are conquerable, Gilbert insisted. Northern let out an inhuman, perverse laugh before pinning the headmaster with an icy stare. Have you ever actually been inside one? Gilbert frowned.
No.
Unfolding his arms, Northern scoffed. And you call it easy? He chuckled darkly. If it was so simple, why were these people plagued by the rifts for 30 years? Or was it 20? A deafening silence fell over the room. At that point, Annette allowed herself a small, proud smile for Northern, even though she had no right to feel that way. His fearless demeanor as he addressed Gilbert as an equal was deeply impressive. Gilbert hesitated before answering. We were always going to venture into those rifts eventually. They're only tier 3, the one that posed real danger you already closed down. So how bad could they be? Northern's eyes widened fractionally as the headmaster's words registered. How bad could it be? He echoed Gilbert's nonchalant query, then chuckled darkly as memories of his harrowing rift experience flashed through his mind. He inhaled and exhaled slowly before pinning Gilbert with a level stare. You have no idea, headmaster. No idea at all of how bad it can really be. Gilbert gestured placatingly, his expression warmly persuasive. And that's precisely where you come in. You survived in that rift for 6 months. With the invaluable information you can provide, this endeavor will be far easier. Northern shook his head slowly, brows furrowed, lips turned down in a morose frown. After a heartbeat of tense silence, he spoke in a toneless rasp. As you said, you have no obligation to tell me anything except what pertains to getting our survival. And undoubtedly, you decide what qualifies as useful for that purpose. He met Gilbert's gaze unflinchingly. Likewise, I have no obligation to provide you any information unless it directly relates to returning home. Gilbert's frown deepened into a ferocious scowl. Nonsense! His powerful voice lanced through the room. What are you saying? That you'll withhold critical information? With what you know, we could close all the rifts and go home. We can return home without needing to close those rifts. And even after closing them, what's your plan for getting us home? I don't think you've even considered that. Your scheme is suicidal, and I can hardly blame you, headmaster. You haven't witnessed the horrors inside those rifts. If you had, you wouldn't be entertaining such reckless ideas. A cocky grin split Gilbert's face as he seemed to slowly unravel. If a talentless whelp like you could clear it, what's to stop the rest of us, those with actual talents and superior foundations, from succeeding? Northern smiled sweetly. I'm going to pretend you didn't just call me talentless. You seem to think you can pull it off because I did. But I'm nothing but a cowardly, selfish stone who would do whatever it takes to survive. even lick a monster's ass. I see you as a hero of justice, always judging what's good and bad. You're just soft bread. You wouldn't last a month in that hellhole. Gilbert frowned deeply. His temperament is astounding. I intentionally tried to provoke him, but he didn't flinch. Besides, I have no plans to withhold information from you. I'll share what I know. Whatever you choose to do with it is not my concern. Gilbert raised an inquisitive brow at Northern. But it would be extremely foolish of me to give away the only valuable asset I possess for free, wouldn't it? A sly grin tugged at the young man's lips. Chapter 115. Raven Light Kageyama, Part 1. After Northern's discussion with Headmaster Gilbert, a few things were established. The most important one, however, was that he was able to maintain his independence. Northern managed to negotiate his way out of being directly associated with them or joining any parties while still securing certain benefits. Of course, Gilbert was an experienced drifter, a sage at that. He wasn't the kind of man Northern could simply manipulate to his own ends. In fact, Northern even suspected that Gilbert had accepted some of his terms because the old man had his own cunning plans afoot. The thought made him incredibly uneasy. I need to be very wary of him going forward. He's a runaway train headed for a wreck. Northern believed Gilbert's heroic ideals were utterly nonsensical. He didn't understand why anyone would want to play the selfless savior amid this disaster, when they could simply focus on finding a way back home. Stupid. He is incredibly stupid. I can't entirely blame him, though. He has never even faced the night terror. Northern suddenly halted mid-stride as an idea sparked in his mind. He curled one corner of his lips into a devious smirk, concocting a cunning plan. That grin of yours is giving me the creeps, Annette remarked. He glanced at her, nearly forgetting the master was walking beside him. You're still here. Yes, I'm still here. Why do you have to say it like that? She grunted. Northern tilted his head, confused for a moment. Sorry, I guess? Annette stared at him silently for a few beats before letting out a whirl of laughter that filled the dark hallway with echoing peals. Her abrupt mirth only compounded Northern's bewilderment. She looked at him with those vibrant, flaming eyes. So you were like that, huh? Socially awkward. Yet you displayed such impressive composure before a sage. Northern offered a shy smile. Honestly, I wasn't sure if it would work. I just had to try, regardless. A frown creased his pale brows. That man. He's a sinking ship. His crazy ideals will destroy everyone around him. Annette studied him blankly for a moment. I guess you must have seen your own fair share of hell. His frown deepened into a malevolent glare. That was far more than a mere fair share, Instructor N. He strode forward determinedly. Dazed for a few seconds, Annette watched him go before hastening to catch up. Still, if you're talking about the one with crazy ideals, I don't think Gilbert should be your primary concern. What do you mean? He asked without turning his head. As they emerged from the hallway, a flowery scent washed over Northern, making him stop abruptly. I recognized this smell. He glanced left and right urgently. What's wrong? Annette queried, seeing his sudden halt. At that moment, two feminine figures ascended the stairs to the platform from the right side. Annette smiled wickedly. Speak of the devil, she muttered under her breath. Raven and Terence came to a stop before Northern, the air instantly chilling with awkward tension for several heartbeats. Northern studied her intently, gauging her abilities while she too seemed to be doing the same to him. Damn. If we leave these two be, they could spend hours just staring at each other. Raven is the worst match for socially awkward Northern, Annette deliberated. And it seemed she wasn't the only one concerned about the situation. Her gaze met Terence's, and the two temporary comrades nodded in silent accord. Terence clapped lightly and cutely cocked her head. Oh, this must be the new drifter from the rift. Care to introduce yourself, Light? Raven nodded curtly. Terence froze, her attempt at lightening the mood having backfired spectacularly. Hello. Northern responded simply. Raven squinted at him, then stated bluntly, "You're strong, and you don't have a soul core or soul essence." "I get that often, I guess?" Northern curled one corner of his lips, trying to hide his rising terror. She could discern that much just from looking at me? He could only perceive Raven as incredibly powerful due to his eyes. All eyes. Perhaps using the unseeing eyes would reveal more, but that could draw unwanted attention with his eyes glowing brighter than usual. For now, he wanted to keep as low a profile as possible in this place. Not to hide his strength necessarily, but not to overtly show it either. That way, people would let their guards down around him, allowing him to take his precious time identifying new talents to copy. Northern. This is Raven. She's probably the strongest drifter among your peers. Annette's throaty voice shattered the heavy silence. Raven shot her an indifferent, unimpressed look before turning back to Northern. "I don't consider myself the strongest. There are probably many who could defeat me if they used their abilities properly and their senses keenly. Like Adrian, for instance." "Hey Light, let's not do that here," Terence quickly interrupted with a nervous laugh. "I'm sorry. She's something of a talent-ability geek." She bowed slightly and steered Raven toward the hallway. Almost reaching it, Raven paused and glanced back, her silvery voice lilting. "What's your name?" Northern also turned slightly, that floral scent seemed to intensify at that moment. "My name is Northern." A frown creased her delicate brows. "What a strange name. Don't you have another?" "Well, my mother often calls me Lael. It's supposed to be some native name she gave me. So, all right then, I'll call you Lael." Northern arched a brow. "I was about to say she secretly calls me that." Still, it felt strangely nice to hear. "What party do you plan to join, Lael?" He lifted his chin slightly, brimming with confidence. "I don't plan on joining any." Disappointment flickered across Raven's features as she glanced down briefly before meeting his gaze again. "Very well then. We'll meet again, Lael." With that, she turned and vanished into the dark hallway, Terence in tow. Northern stared after her departing form for a few moments. "What a strange girl," he muttered under his breath. Chapter 116. Raven Light Kageyama, Part 2. Raven gently rapped her knuckles against the wooden door before pushing it open. Inside, she found Gilbert hunched over his table, arms folded. A dark cloud of worry etched onto his wizened features. "Sage Gilbert, is everything all right?" Terence's voice rang with sincere concern as she peered over Raven's shoulder from the hallway. Gilbert's brow furrowed into a deep frown. "He's a difficult one," he grumbled, leaning back in his chair to regard the two ladies. "What happened?" Terence pressed, stepping fully into the room with Raven. Turning his gaze to Raven, Gilbert explained, "He refused to give us the information for free, and he thinks your idea to close down all the rifts instead of focusing on going home is a suicidal attempt." Raven's expression remained indifferent, her crimson eyes unflinching. "I see," she said coldly after a beat of silence. "Anyone would think that." Terence spoke with uttermost worry, her gaze shifting between Gilbert and Raven. "Even the Empire isn't paying attention to all the rifts anymore. They've come to understand these rifts cannot be defeated. Many have ventured into them, never to return. Yet you still insist on closing them?" Raven gave her a curt nod of affirmation. Terence stared at the unbreakable young woman, her pale face a mask of exasperation. This girl would surely be the death of her with these constant headaches. Common sense didn't seem to work on Raven Light Kageyama. Drawing a deep breath, Terence asked sternly, "Light, who gave you this wild idea that you can clear the rifts?" For a few heartbeats, Raven was silent, her gaze drifting towards the closed door. She seemed to be looking beyond it. Finally, she responded, "It was merely speculation before, but now that he made it out, I'm even more confident." With a loud exhale, Terence palmed half of her face, shaking her head. "There's no talking you out of this, is there?" Her voice took on a pleading tone as she continued, "We could just focus on going to your continent, you know. The people here would gladly follow you there." But Raven was unmoved, shaking her head firmly. They'll never be accepted. They'll be trampled upon and treated as outsiders because that's what they are. They need to fight for their true home. Her words rang with iron resolve and a wisdom beyond her years that even Terence could not deny. The whole insane plan to conquer and close every last rift had been Raven's idea. She was the one who planted those seeds in Gilbert's mind. Terence wasn't privy to the exact words used to sway the sage, but clearly Raven had coaxed him enough to see some benefit in her scheme. In other words, it was possible Gilbert supported her so fervently because he had something to gain. But for Raven, she just genuinely wanted to help these displaced people find a true home again. At first, Terence had doubted the girl's intentions, certain there had to be some selfish or hypocritical side hiding beneath that pure exterior. That was why she had initially kept Raven so close, to unveil whatever flaws lurked beneath the surface, to understand why the stranger suddenly wanted to aid a group she had no ties to. As days stretched into weeks and months, however, Terence found only deeper admiration for the young warrior. Raven had led the siege to claim this very castle from the monsters. She had gathered parties to scour the lands for survivors, bringing them back to the relative safety of the fortress. She had hunted monster after monster to feed the people. She had journeyed to negotiate with the western stronghold of Sloria, establishing a vital trade agreement though they still refused refugees. It was Raven who selected each party leader, explaining their capabilities and potential to Gilbert. She had filtered out the weak-willed from the strong with an almost preternatural sense, advising Sage Gilbert to groom the latter to lead. All of this behind closed doors, in private councils with the elderly sage himself. For the longest time, Terence had assumed all these sweeping reforms were Gilbert's ideas, unaware of the real force driving it all from the shadows. When she found out, she at first had taken Raven for the deranged type, a manipulator who loved ruling from the shadows, because how else did she have the elderly sage wrapped around her finger? Much later, Terence realized that couldn't be further from the truth. Raven would have stepped up as the overt leader if needed be. But the survivors and students were different factions in need of a firm, resonant voice to unite them, one only an experienced and strong elder like Gilbert could provide. Even though Raven was confident in her strength over all others here, she had chosen the most effective path, putting the people's survival and growth over any desires for personal dominion. Or perhaps there were other reasons she avoided the spotlight, reasons Terence suspected but never prodded. She had come to adore Raven's pure intentions too much to risk sowing doubt. Never before had Terence encountered someone so selflessly driven to uplift others. Gilbert must have recognized that incredible spirit as well, which is why he entertaining even her most outlandish ideas. Wilde didn't begin to describe Raven's plans, and yet, they had come this far largely thanks to those schemes. If anyone could help them take back their homeland, it was this mysterious young woman. With a resigned sigh, Terence gave a reluctant nod. You're right, we need to fight for what's ours. I don't think any amount of persuasion will stop you from doing what you intend. So what's the plan? Raven nodded curtly in return, crimson eyes fixing on Gilbert intently. When is he going to give us the information? He asked for a few days to rest and assess things, the elderly sage replied. And what price did he ask in return? Gilbert scoffed derisively. An equal share of any updated way home. A place to stay secluded from the crowd where he won't be bothered, even if it's monster-infested. I personally think he's gonna die soon. The fool is overconfident, ignorant of the true dangers even run-of-the-mill monsters pose out there. He hasn't even encountered a catastrophe-level corpse-eater. Raven's expression turned severe, a silent rebuke in her crimson stare. I strongly advise you do not underestimate him. Falling silent, Gilbert met her intense gaze, giving the warning due consideration. That being said, Raven continued after a moment, I plan to go on a journey, and I want him to come with me. Who? The new boy? Gilbert's eyebrows shot up. Raven nodded, her lustrous black hair swaying gently with the motion. I don't think he'll want to follow you at all, the elderly sage doubted with a shake of his head. A small, Enigmatic smile played across Raven's full lips. Don't worry, I think he will, if I offer him the right price. Chapter 117. Singularity Dark Terror. Northern relaxed into the worn couch in Annette's quarters, her bed sitting opposite but currently unoccupied. She had welcomed him to stay for a few hours while she went to arrange lodging per Gilbert's instructions. Her place is set apart from the rest. Unlike the pseudo-civilization teeming with survivors, Annette's abode stood in blessed seclusion. Still, it remained close enough to avoid monster onslaughts, though even at this location, Northern doubted she could ever truly avoid such threats entirely. But then, Instructor Anne is quite strong, and she's probably only grown. She may be the strongest here besides Gilbert. I wonder if the twins are around as well. For several leisurely minutes, Northern simply lounged on the couch, mind idly wandering. But then he remembered a task at hand. Closing his eyes, he opened them once more to the grandeur of the limitless void's throne hall. He found himself standing before the sinister flames dancing their eerie ballet, shrouding the enormous throne in a tenebrous aura of dread authority. Northern paused, staring into the hypnotic undulations for a few heartbeats. Then, averting his gaze, he turned to the side. Adding a solemn depth to his tone, he called out, "Dark terror." A thick flame as black as the night itself erupted before him, flickering with dancing azure hues. As it slowly receded, the stalwart form of a monster took shape from the fiery depths. Red tetrad eyes burned with graceless virality, the terror's maw slightly ajar to reveal terrifying rows of jagged fangs. It stood even taller than before, forcing Northern to crane his neck upwards into that scorching glare. Black lustrous horns twisted from its head, while an extra pair of arms had emerged beneath the originals. Both pairs coiled like wire cables beneath the monster's onyx skin. Its sinuous tail slithered out from behind, gently swaying. "As fearsome as ever," Northern murmured, folding his arms as he appraised the terror's evolution with an approving nod. His gaze lingered on those new secondary limbs. These must be from after its evolution. If he recalled correctly, he had managed to slay Night Terror just as that metamorphosis was completing. "That was unnatural luck," he said softly, pursing his lips. "I don't know where I'd be now if I hadn't unlocked the unseeing eyes." Gently, he reached out to lay a hand on the terror's bulging, furred chest. Its skin held a sinister, stinging chill that prickled gooseflesh up his arm. "Let's make sure we don't ever get that close to dying again," Northern vowed. With a sigh, he called out again. "Call." The same powerful flames erupted in an even grander blaze. Call, after all, was an entity far mightier than Night Terror ever was. "But I'd prefer Night Terror," Northern mused. "If this ability allows me to utilize its powers, I wonder if it will be possible to use the abilities of the vestige of chaos itself. If so, that would be incredibly useful, because I have a plan in mind." His eyes settled on the energetic plumes of flames, slowly resolving into the humanoid form of Call itself. Skin of burnished darkness, sinister red engravings snaking across its entire body. A single pair baleful eyes filled with primal malice. A devilish horn, longer and more twisted than even Night Terror's, jutting from its head. A cloak of pure umbral gloom shrouding its figure. The sight stirred memories of Northern's harrowing battle against the Castle Lord, of how Night Terror had swooped in to steal that final kill at the last moment. A contented smile tugged at his lips. "It all happened for the best, I suppose. Who knows what might have occurred had I taken those fragments for myself." Turning his attention back to Night Terror's motionless form, Northern studied the description on his void ability's use, for a certain idea had been percolating in his mind. Description: you can choose to materialize the soul of any entity you have slain. Doing so bestows you with that soul's abilities. With a thought, he summoned his clone to his left, both of them shrouded in eternal twilight. Then he mentally commanded the clone to utilize the void ability. Immediately, Night Terror's stalwart shape was consumed in roiling black and azure flames that enveloped the clone as well, hungrily devouring its form over a long period. As the inferno finally died away, Northern beheld his clone. Remade. A torrent of pure exhilaration surged through his veins. But the true exhilaration was yet to come. His eyes widened as a flood of notification panels burst into view. Congratulations! You have recorded an incredible feat. You have successfully created a singularity, dark terror. The singularity will be extracted from your cloning talent. This will cause your cloning ability to revert to its original rank. However, the singularity is now an independent entity, sharing a mental link with you alone. On your command, it is capable of independent actions, with the same capacity for growth as your original clones. In other words, this singularity dark terror can continue evolving, and upon each evolution you will be ingrained with all of its strength. When this singularity slays other monsters, it can absorb their soul essence, gaining soul fragments. The own talent singularity, S-class, has been reverted to advancing cloning A-class. You can use talent fragments to further evolve this talent. Northern's jaw went slack as another explanation panel materialized. By having your singularity clone utilize the void ability, you did not simply materialize dark terror. You permanently separated that one clone's existence into an independent singularity. Crap! He breathed out in awe. He had certainly not expected such a magnified, paradigm-shifting result. His original thought had been that, instead of manifesting night terror directly onto himself, having a clone do so would prove more effective. That way he could diversify his power, especially if the clone could also wield the vestige of chaos abilities. But to think his clone would permanently become dark terror itself by achieving true singularity. Does that mean the sole purpose of the singularity was always meant to separate the one clone, to elevate it into its own entity? It would certainly explain the abilities named me, myself, and I, as well as the description. I am the only one, it is me, myself, and I. All others strengthen me. Now that I think about it, it does sound exactly like something meant to develop a sense of true individual self. Northern studied the motionless terror, not a shred of outward emotion or awareness on its hideous features. Then his gaze turned to the flickering form of call. So if I rank up the talent further, I might be able to create a singularity call as well? The prospect was almost too tantalizing to behold. With a slight pang of regret, he dismissed call back into the void's embrace, leaving only dark terror's presence behind. Grinning widely, he spoke to the terror. You and I are going to accomplish great things together. Chapter 118. Northern. Northern opened his eyes, emerging from the plane of the limitless void. A remnant of blissful joy still lingered on his face as Annette opened the door and walked in. Huh? Were you dozing off? She asked, arching an inquisitive brow. Northern rose to his feet, shaking his head slightly. Though he longed to revel in the wondrous experience, he swiftly composed himself. Not at all, he retorted, his expression turning impassive as his azure eyes swept over Annette's humble abode. The living space bore a rugged, roughly hewn charm. A simple carved table and chair stood beside her bed, antique brown papers resembling dried animal hides resting atop the surface. Overhead, the makeshift ceiling was fashioned from the skins of slain monsters. The rain here can be brutal at times. It broke through once, so I had to improvise, Annette explained, noting Northern's lingering gaze upon the unimpressive ceiling. She scratched her head sheepishly. Why am I even justifying myself? Don't you often get attacked by monsters at night? Northern interjected, his solemn eyes meeting hers. Over 100 kilometers from here, that area seems infested with them. Being this far from the main settlement must make you a frequent target. Annette's brow furrowed momentarily before her lips curled into an amused smirk. Are you worried about me?
No.
I'm merely asking, he stated flatly. I want to understand why you've chosen to reside so far away. Wait a minute? How is he able to tell the distance? Has he been there before? She studied him for a few beats, then shrugged nonchalantly. Seriously, this guy. I'm so lost. Well, I was staying there until 3 months ago. A lot of things started pissing me off, let's leave it at that. And yes, I get attacked frequently. Thanks to that, I might become a savant sooner than expected. Northern's eyes widened slightly. Oh, that's fortunate. Indeed. Annette nodded, a glint of pride in her vermilion eyes. When you reach the master rank, it's as if you hit an invisible wall. Advancing to the next level becomes exponentially harder, haunted by the thought of when your soul core will finally be satiated. Generally, it takes years of relentless hunting to progress, but I've managed it in mere months. She paused, a sly grin tugging at her lips. Do you know why? Because of the sheer number of monsters you encounter here, Northern deduced. Precisely. And their ranks too, the weakest around here are of the savage rank. There's even an apex-level savage lurking towards the northern part of the capital. Annette trailed off abruptly, biting her lip to stifle the laughter threatening to erupt. Don't! Northern warned, his tone flat. Just continue. But Annette could no longer contain her mirth, dissolving into raucous laughter as she stumbled backward. The northern part of the capital. The northern part. She guffawed loudly, clutching her sides as tears of amusement pricked her eyes. Northern watched in awkward silence, painfully accustomed to such mockery over his name. A cruel twist of fate courtesy of his whimsical father, Shin. He could vividly recall the day they discovered him, when Shin decided to name the newfound child after the forest that had blessed them with a son. Though it deeply embarrassed his mother, she hadn't the heart to defy her husband's wishes. Ultimately, she bestowed upon Northern a secret name originating from her tribe. As Annette's laughter finally subsided, her dancing eyes met Northern's frosty glare. Ahem! She cleared her throat, endeavoring to recompose herself. Forgive me. I've been looking forward to that ever since learning your unfortunate name. I presume the headmaster gave it to you? Northern extended his hand expectantly. Of course. Producing a folded, antiqued brown paper akin to those on her table, Annette's lips twitched with the effort of suppressing another grin. But I'm concerned. The location he provided points to the northern side, the very area we discussed. Though she struggled valiantly, her expression still grated on Northern's nerves. He shrugged dismissively. It's fine. That's precisely where I wish to go. Annette studied him intently for a moment, then sighed in resignation. I can't fathom what's going through your mind, but do not grow overconfident. Her gaze intensified. You may have emerged from a Tier V rift, but the monsters here are not to be underestimated either. A small, confident smile played across Northern's lips as he nodded obediently. I'm not overconfident. I'm simply confident in my abilities. Annette's eyes widened briefly before she scoffed lightly. I see. Extending the paper, she continued. This is a map of the city. Dangerous areas are marked in red, your abode in black. Thank you, Northern murmured softly, accepting the map. Think nothing of it. Though I am curious. She eyed him speculatively. What will you be doing? Are you truly uninterested in joining any parties? He nodded, his expression stern. I have no interest in parties. After battling monsters for 6 months, I think I'd like a respite before venturing into anything of that nature. Anything I do will be aimed at returning to the Central Plains. A contemplative look settled over Annette's features. I see. She hesitated, then continued carefully. One final question. Then, Northern met her gaze expectantly. Drawing a steadying breath, she asked, what happened in that rift? Why was it growing? How did you survive? Alone? An enigmatic smile curved Northern's lips as he closed his eyes briefly, then reopened them. What's the hurry? You can always learn of those when I choose to reveal it generally. Annette held his inscrutable gaze for several heartbeats before scoffing lightly. Honestly, I can't make heads or tails of what's going on in that head of yours. And it's frustrating. She scratched her hidden scalp absently. Anyway, there's a massive wolf at the castle that won't let anyone near. It's fiercely guarding a satchel in its jaws. Northern arched a brow. Mr. Fluffy? For a few moments, Annette could only gape wordlessly. She had suspected the peculiar wolf's connection to Northern, yet simultaneously doubted such a fantastical notion. It was impossible for monsters to simply accompany drifters of their own accord unless tamed. And true tamers were incredibly rare. Hearing him casually refer to the beast by name utterly confirmed her suspicion, leaving her momentarily speechless. At this rate, I'm not even surprised anymore. He's probably not going to explain how the hell he managed to acquire a monster companion without being a tamer. She sighed heavily. I guess your father isn't the only one with issues regarding names. Northern's brow furrowed in confusion. Ugh! Waving her hand dismissively, Annette refocused her vermilion eyes upon him. I have a hunt in a few minutes. Feel free to stay around for as long as you'd like. It would be nice to catch up when I return, but I doubt that will be possible. A wry smile tugged at her lips. Whatever you do, don't get reckless. Northern responded with a small, sincere smile. Thank you. You're welcome. Turning to depart, Annette paused as Northern's voice halted her steps. Instructor and... She glanced over her shoulder inquiringly. Yes, North Boy. Forgive me for asking, but how does one transfer items to another person? Let's say I want to sell items. How would I go about that? Her eyes widened in disbelief. This guy. You really survived that rift without knowing a damn thing. Chapter 119. The Horror of Brimfield Estate Part 1. Items were quite the unusual phenomena in the world of drifters. When received, they became intrinsically bound to a drifter's soul, and it didn't matter how far apart they were from the drifter, they'd always return to their soul. This explained how Northern could still summon the mortal blade despite leaving it behind in his room before his capture by the wannabe night terrors. The blade had simply returned to the embrace of his soul as mere unwoven sparks, and even he could innately sense them lingering there. However, the concept of permanently transferring possession had always perplexed him. How could one relinquish an item forever when it continually returned to its original owner's soul? Who knew it would be so simple? As Annette had succinctly explained before departing, all he needed was to summon the desired item and directly pass it to the intended recipient while mentally willing the transfer. If the item disappeared upon contact, the transaction failed and required repeating. But if it remained, the exchange was successful, both parties instinctively aware of the soulbound gain or loss. An inexplicable sensation drifters simply understood. Northern was immensely grateful for this insight, having wondered how to sell his surplus items. Not that he was in any hurry, but possessing such knowledge was invaluable. First, I need to settle in and assess the situation, he deliberated pragmatically. Gather information about this environment, what it was like before the monster disaster, and the means they used for travel to other continents. Then I'll... His mental strategizing ground to an abrupt halt as he collided with someone. Stumbling half a step back as reflex compelled him to murmur, I'm sorry. Watch where you going, bro. Tiny, snarling voice snapped. Belatedly glancing down, Northern found himself eyeing a fierce yet emotionless black-haired child, who couldn't have been 10 years old yet. Isn't that rude for someone so young? The boy shot him a wild glare. Why looking at? Exhaling slowly, Northern pinched the bridge of his nose as a rigid cord formed on his brow. Apologies for not watching my path. Still, shouldn't a child like yourself be back at the castle gates with the others? It's rather dangerous out here. The child's scowl deepened. None ya business. He yelled defiantly, brushing past Northern with an arrogant swagger. Northern watched the peculiar child's retreating form, an odd sense of familiarity nagging at him, as if he'd encountered this boy before, yet he was certain he hadn't. If so, the memorable arrogance would have left an indelible impression. Dismissing the enigmatic encounter, his thoughts suddenly pivoted. Mr. Fluffy. He'd completely forgotten about retrieving Mr. Fluffy after finishing with Annette. Ah well, I'll fetch him next time I visit the capital. Nodding to himself, he turned and continued down the narrow street, flanked by the remnants of stone residences, pubs, and inns, once lively structures now rendered hollow and desolate, struggling to recount happier days. After a few minutes, Northern reached a gated estate entrance, the iron portcullis overgrown with tangled vines yet left ajar. Through the opening, he glimpsed the overgrown path leading to the estate's lone mansion, the surrounding forest harboring an unmistakable aura. Damn! This place is packed with monsters. He had sensed their presence from some distance but deliberately avoided confrontation, not out of trepidation, but because he was keenly aware of being followed. Unsurprising, given his recent emergence from a Tier 5 rift after 6 harrowing months. They were undoubtedly curious about his capabilities. In fact, he suspected this was precisely why Gilbert had provided him with these coordinates, an unspoken test of sorts. A sly smile curved Northern's lips as he surveyed his surroundings. They're quite skilled, too light on their feet. As a walker, I likely would not have detected them. Evolving into a drifter had heightened his environmental awareness to an extraordinary degree. I wonder if it's like this for everyone, or if my unique eyes grant me some spatial awareness. The concept of spatial awareness, an innate, panoramic sense of one's surroundings without need for direct observation, was something he had attempted to evoke during the castle battle against the monster horde. He couldn't definitively confirm whether he had succeeded until he entered battle, but his instincts insisted it probably had manifested upon achieving the drifter rank. In any case, he would know when he battles a couple of monsters. But he didn't intend to do so anytime soon. Not when he was being followed. Let's make this a bit of fun. A menacing grin spread across his features. Then, without preamble, Northern vanished, leaving only a wake of fractured ground in his absence. 2 observers, one camouflaged amongst the ebony slates 50 meters from the estate gate and another peering through an abandoned inn's window, reacted with stunned disbelief as their quarry seemed to blink out of existence. He didn't discover us, did he? The building-bound scout thought and flew through the broken window in a blur. His partner followed, running swiftly across the slates without making any sound. Then he flew into the air and landing on the inner roll, before standing up and running a few steps forward. Both of them converged at the point Northern had been. Tense frowns creased their features as they eyed each other warily. "Do you think our cover was blown?" the slate dweller asked, brow furrowed. His companion shook his head adamantly.
Impossible.
My stealth ability completely erases my presence. There's no way he could have sensed us. Then why do you think he moved like that, so suddenly? The frantic stare settled on the bony, scarred face of the inn lurker. Whatever horrors had befallen him, leaving a crude indentation trailing from beneath his eyes to his jawline, was cruel. It might have been spontaneous, the inn dweller surmised. We could be overthinking this. So what should we do? The slate dweller inquired, the tattered cloak framing his jaw fluttering gently in the breeze. A resolute gleam entered the inn dweller's eye. What else? We follow him. Without further discussion, both blurred into motion once more, determined to unravel the mystery of the drifter who had survived a Tier 5 rift. Chapter 120. The Horror of Brimfield Estate Part 2. The path ahead was shrouded in impenetrable darkness, towering trees interweaving their massive branches like tentacles across the sky, enshrouding the forest in pitch blackness. Mere shreds of light filtered through the canopy, only to be consumed by the suffocating gloom. The darkness was tangible, a physical presence that could temporarily blind the unwary should any sliver of brightness pierce its veil. It rendered vision utterly useless, a literal blindfold of shade. And yet, a figure streaked through the Stygian void, leaping nimbly from branch to branch with effortless grace. Far behind trailed 2 pursuers, one cloaked in tattered rags, the other garbed in sleek black leather armor with scarred face. Despite the distance, both moved with preternatural stealth and elegance, their very ability to navigate such murky depths a testament to their formidable skills. Wow! They're good! Northern marveled inwardly as he alighted on another branch, glancing back over his shoulder. Turning his gaze forward once more, he spotted his destination below. This distance should suffice. With the weightless grace of a falling leaf, He descended to the loamy forest floor, surveying his gloomy surroundings before uttering a single command. Dark terror. Inky black flames erupted amidst the dense darkness, bathing the area in brilliant azure hues that danced fleetingly before winking out. A malevolent presence now stood before Northern, its eyes burning with menacing crimson flames, the only facet visible amid its seamless camouflage with the perpetual night, as if the shadows themselves had sprouted a tetrad of sinister, glowing eyes. For several heartbeats, Northern studied the entity, dark terror's baleful glare raising gooseflesh along his arms. Crap. I don't think I could have won without sheer luck. The night terror had already proven immensely daunting. To face this further evolved version imbued with the vestige of the Chaos Prince, Northern shuddered inwardly. I'd probably be dead by now if I didn't unlock the unseeing eyes. Night terror was formidable, but dark terror was an unreasoning incarnation of purest malice. A devilish, hellion-rank monster. I can't help feeling relieved. Commanding such an unholy abomination was terrifying, yet deeply reassuring. Northern was confident that no human currently inhabiting this settlement could withstand dark terror's onslaught. All right then. Let's see if I'm right. Turning to the devil, he commanded, "Go forth and obliterate anything that bars your path." The devilish monster slowly pivoted, pausing briefly before surging forward like a bolt of darkness, leaving a spiderweb of cracks in its wake. Eyeing the shattered ground, a frisson of excitement trickled along Northern's spine. Let's see how this unfolds. Smiling thinly, he too sprang into motion, leaping effortlessly from trunk to branch before alighting amongst the boughs once more. Darkness swirled protectively around him, coalescing into the imposing visage of a horned devil with 4 smoldering azure eyes. Seconds later, the fearsome facade melted back into the perpetual night, rendering Northern utterly invisible. Several minutes passed before the 2 pursuing figures blurred into view. The devilish entity surged through the gloom, crimson eyes leaving blurred trails as it flowed like tendrils of smoke. A hulking, animalistic shape suddenly burst forth, extending arms that rippled with corded muscle beneath its hairless, pallid hide. Dark terror twirled with serpentine grace, razor-edged talons flashing in a blur as it neatly decapitated the brutish monster before its grasping appendages could connect. It watched impassively as onyx blood gushed from the severed neck, the ox-like creature crumpling to its knees in a spreading pool of viscera. Averting its malefic glare, it languidly surveyed its surroundings. 2 more of the bovine critters materialized from the murk, encircling the devil in a crude attempt to trap it. One rumbled an earth-shaking growl and charged, the ground trembling beneath its thunderous footfalls. Dark terror remained motionless, contemptuous disdain etched into its inscrutable features as the stampeding monster barreled towards it. At the final possible instant, the devil twisted aside with negligent ease. As the rampaging beast hurtled past, dark terror lashed out with razored black claws, eviscerating its foe from navel to sternum in a single sickening stroke. Steaming entrails sloughed free in a putrid tangle, the ox monster continuing its unstoppable charge to crash shoulder-first through the bole of an ancient tree in a detonation of wooden shrapnel. It finally skidded to a stop, digging furrows with its horns before expiring in a gory sprawl of ruptured organs and fluids. Dark terror cocked its head, as if bemused by this pitiful display. "This bastard," Northern observed from the sheltering dark, uncertain of the fiend's intent but keenly familiar with the night terror's penchant for cruelty. If even a fraction of its former persona yet lingered within the soul now subsumed by the void, then he knew the entity was simply indulging its sadistic whims. 2 more bovine creatures came barreling through the gloom in a thunderous cadence, jaws agape to impale their adversary upon ancient horns. With an indolent pivot, dark terror spun between the onrushing monsters, barbed tail whipping out to transfix one through the ribcage. Bones cracked like kindling as the wicked barb punched through armored hide, erupting from the brute's back in a spray of gore. Utilizing the body as a grotesque flail, dark terror swung the twitching carcass, bludgeoning the remaining monster with its own kin. Skull met skull in a thunderous crunch, the force slamming the hapless beast prone as its jaws shattered, shards of bone spiking through the ruined folds of its facial hide. Dark terror continued pummeling the creature relentlessly, reducing it to an unrecognizable, pulpy ruin. Once sated, it flicked aside the carcass with contemptuous ease before pinning the lone survivor beneath its withering, hate-filled glare. The final brute charged forth, rearing up on hind legs as it neared, thick fists raising for a brain-pulping salvo. Dark terror did not flinch, did not move as those meaty sledgehammers descended in obliterating arcs. At the ultimate nanosecond, it flowed like smoke between the creature's brute arms, talons flashing in a blur of slashing, eviscerating strikes that butchered the monster's torso into a ruinous lattice. It crashed face first, shattered ribs impaling its own organs on brutal impact. As it jerked and thrashed, dark terror raked its claws along the ruin in slow, agonizing strips, parting flesh from bone with sadistic lethargy. When the spasming at last fell still, dark terror lifted its malevolent glare towards the two figures rooted before it, trembling legs belying their instinctive terror. As it studied them through those blazing crimson orbs, a thin, grotesque smile seemed to curl at the edges of its bestial maw. Oh, crap. If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions, just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today.